The Alaskan Death Triangle stretches across an expanse of rugged mountains, frozen rivers, and remote forests, where the disappearance of planes, hikers, and travelers has baffled authorities for decades. Here, the land seems to conspire with the sky, concealing trails and swallowing evidence, leaving only haunting questions in its wake. You will encounter vanished pilots whose last radio calls dissolved into silence, hikers who never returned from well-marked trails, and small vessels found abandoned without a soul aboard. From the glaciers that shift like living ice to the dense wilderness where tracks abruptly end, each story exposes the precarious line between survival and disappearance. As you follow these mysteries, you will witness the unsettling patterns, the inexplicable vanishings, and the enduring enigmas that define this region, places where certainty fades and the Alaska Triangle keeps its secrets tightly locked. The vanishing flight of Hale Boggs and Nick Begich. The cold air drifting across the Alaskan interior carries a stillness that seems to deepen every unanswered question left behind by those who have vanished within its borders. The disappearance of Hale Boggs and Nick Begich remains one of the most unsettling stories tied to the region often called the Alaska Triangle. Their flight, a seemingly routine journey across familiar air routes, slipped into that expanse of rugged mountains, unstable weather, and unpredictable winds without leaving a trace. The silence that followed has lingered for decades with the weight of something that refuses to be understood. Even the most established flight corridors could turn treacherous with almost no warning, creating a pervasive sense of vulnerability that frames the entire mystery. The Alaska Triangle, by its vast and inhospitable nature, forms the stage upon which their final moments must have unfolded, though what truly occurred remains concealed within that frozen wilderness. The mystery persists precisely because everything known about the flight can be accounted for, yet nothing about its disappearance can be fully explained. The morning of October 16, 1972 began with weather conditions shifting rapidly across south-central Alaska, a pattern common enough to be routine yet volatile enough to challenge even the most experienced pilots. Hale Boggs, then serving as Majority Leader of the United States House of Representatives, and fellow Congressman Nick Begich, boarded a Cessna 310 piloted by Don Yons, a man deeply familiar with the region's aviation challenges. The small aircraft carried the two lawmakers and Begich's aide, Russell Brown, on a planned trip from Anchorage to Juneau, following a route typically chosen for its balance of efficiency and familiarity. Early reports indicated that Yons had experience navigating the Portage Pass corridor, a narrow mountain passage frequently used to shorten the journey toward the Panhandle, though it was also known for sudden fog banks and turbulent air. Yons's confidence in the need to maintain a demanding travel schedule made the route logical, yet it also placed the aircraft at the mercy of an environment capable of turning dangerous within minutes. As the plane departed Anchorage and rose toward the southeast corridor, nothing suggested the profound mystery that would soon unfold. No distress call ever emerged from the aircraft, a fact that continues to trouble investigators because even a brief message could have yielded critical clues about altitude, location, or mechanical trouble. The lack of communication left the timeline stark and unforgiving. The plane departed, moved southward, and simply never arrived. Radar coverage in that era was limited, particularly over mountainous terrain where signal loss was expected, meaning the moment of disappearance could not be tied to any precise coordinate. The absence of radar confirmation widened the search zone across deep valleys, shifting snow cover, and dense forest, where a small aircraft could easily vanish. Investigators noted that conditions near Portage Pass deteriorated that morning, with low clouds forming barriers that made visual navigation hazardous. Even with these observations, no definitive chain of events could be established, leaving only probabilities where answers should have been. What followed became one of the largest search operations in American history, involving military aircraft, civilian volunteers, Coast Guard units, and specialized equipment sweeping tens of thousands of square miles. The search lasted 39 days, a staggering effort reflecting both the urgency of locating prominent political figures and the daunting nature of the terrain. Teams employed infrared scanning, aerial photography, and ground patrols, yet none revealed even a fragment of debris. The operation extended from the Chugach Mountains to remote reaches of Prince William Sound and beyond, combing each area with the expectation that at least something would surface. The complete absence of physical evidence challenged assumptions about crash dynamics, weather effects, and terrain concealment, prompting some investigators to note that even in remote regions, total disappearance on this scale was exceptionally rare. With each passing day, the landscape itself seemed to obscure the truth more completely, reinforcing the sense that the Alaska Triangle had absorbed whatever had occurred. The political prominence of the passengers added another layer of complexity. Hale Boggs's role as majority leader and his history with the Warren Commission made speculation inevitable, though no verified evidence ever supported darker theories. Nick Begich's disappearance created parallel waves of grief and confusion within Alaska, where he was respected as a dedicated public servant. The official investigation concentrated on environmental and mechanical possibilities, emphasizing that the region's weather posed formidable challenges even for capable pilots. Yet the absence of a wreck site or confirmed flight path allowed speculation to flourish, shaped by the same vastness and uncertainty characteristic of the Alaska Triangle. The mystery grew not because new evidence appeared, but because none ever did. The aircraft itself offered further insight. The Cessna 310 was known for reliable performance, yet susceptible to difficulty in icing conditions or abrupt turbulence. Maintenance records and prior flight logs revealed no indication of mechanical unfitness, yet sudden cloud formation in Portage Pass could create conditions with almost no margin for correction. Pilots familiar with the area noted that downdrafts in the corridor could reach intensities capable of disorienting even skilled aviators, particularly when visibility shrank to a few hundred feet. The combination of geographic funneling, erratic gusts, and rapidly forming fog has given the Alaska Triangle its reputation, built on navigational realities rather than legend. For the Boggs-Begich flight, these factors provide a plausible framework without offering a definitive answer, leaving the line between likelihood and certainty undefined. Decades passed with renewed searches, technological re-evaluations, and continued interest from aviation experts, yet none produced a breakthrough. Satellite imagery analysis, improved mapping, and modern terrain modelling were applied in attempts to narrow the crash zone, yet all ended in unresolved silence. What distinguishes this case from other disappearances is not the passengers' prominence, but the contrast between the enormous search effort and the absolute void of physical results. The Alaska Triangle feels fitting here, not because of folklore, but due to the unknowable quality imposed by the landscape itself. Verified details bring the story closer to the moment of disappearance, yet none bridge the gap between what is known and what remains hidden. Speculation continues about the location of the wreckage, beneath glaciers where ice and snow could conceal debris for decades, or in remote valleys, or possibly submerged in coastal waters where frigid depths and strong currents could erase any trace. All remain hypotheses, grounded in geography but unconfirmed. Occasionally, archaeologists and unrelated search teams have monitored the region for signs of aircraft debris, yet none have surfaced in more than 50 years. The case has become an enduring element of Alaskan history, demonstrating the silence the wilderness can impose upon human endeavours. Without wreckage or remains, every explanation remains an outline rather than a resolution. The vanishing of Hale Boggs and Nick Begich endures because the landscape that consumed their flight keeps its secrets, offering nothing to indicate what truly occurred, leaving only the frozen expanse as witness to the unknown. The Lost Douglas, C-54D with 44 souls. 44 passengers boarded the Douglas C-54D expecting a routine flight through Alaska, yet the aircraft vanished without a trace, leaving only questions that have lingered for decades. The flight originated from Anchorage, tasked with transporting military personnel and support staff to a remote destination in the Alaska interior, a corridor frequently used for supply and personnel movement. The aircraft was considered reliable, well-maintained, and capable of navigating the region's harsh conditions, yet even a machine of proven design cannot contend with all the hazards the Alaskan wilderness presents. What followed became one of the most baffling disappearances in the Alaska Triangle, a mystery defined less by what was known than by the absence of any verifiable evidence. Investigators would later note that the combination of dense mountain ranges, unpredictable weather, and vast expanses of glacial terrain created a perfect environment for vanishing without a trace, an environment that swallowed the C-54D whole. The C-54D itself was a workhorse of its era, designed for long-distance travel and heavy payloads, yet its size and configuration offered little advantage when confronted with the sudden microclimates of south-central Alaska. Pilots relied heavily on visual navigation through narrow passes and valleys, and while instruments were dependable, the margins for error were slim when faced with rapidly shifting winds or unexpected downdrafts. The 44 passengers on board included experienced military personnel who trusted in the plane's design, yet trust could not extend beyond the control of human skill, and in this case, skill would meet a wilderness that defied certainty. Records show that the aircraft had no mechanical issues before departure, emphasizing that its disappearance was not the result of technical failure, but of circumstances far beyond standard precautions. Pilots flying through this corridor were acutely aware of how the mountains manipulated air currents, creating sudden turbulence that could overwhelm even seasoned aviators. Rising peaks funneled wind unpredictably, producing gusts and vortices that could lift a plane abruptly or push it toward treacherous cliff sides. Visibility could drop in an instant when fog or cloud cover settled into the valleys, masking the contours of snowfields, glaciers, and rock faces, and making navigation a test of judgment and timing. Even with modern radar, a small or medium-sized plane can vanish momentarily in these conditions. In 1950, radar coverage was rudimentary, particularly over the interior, where signals often failed to penetrate mountainous terrain. The C-54D's disappearance would later be categorized as total, with no signals indicating distress and no confirmed observations of the plane after its last known position. Communications from the aircraft were sporadic at best, consisting of brief radio transmissions that offered little more than confirmation of departure and approximate position. These fragments failed to illuminate the sequence of events, leaving search teams with only a vague sense of where to begin. The plane's flight path, though planned and routine, dissolved into a haze of uncertainty as it crossed the Alaskan Triangle, and by the time the absence was noted, precious hours had passed. Radar reports were inconclusive, and by the time search operations commenced, snow, ice, and seasonal fog had already begun to alter the landscape. This combination of factors rendered a direct line of inquiry nearly impossible, and the vanished aircraft became emblematic of the Triangle's ability to erase human presence from its maps entirely. Search efforts mobilized rapidly once the disappearance was confirmed, involving the Air Force, Coast Guard, and local civilian volunteers who navigated glaciers, dense forests, and icy rivers in the hope of finding debris or survivors. The scale of the operation reflected both the urgency of locating 44 lives and the formidable nature of the terrain. Teams combed every conceivable valley and glacier, deploying visual scouting, rudimentary aerial photography, and grid-based ground searches. Even with these resources, the vastness and complexity of the area made total coverage impossible, and over time the search zone expanded, encompassing more miles of inhospitable wilderness than most Americans could imagine. Despite their best efforts, nothing substantial emerged. No wreckage, no personal effects, and no trace of the plane could be located. Locals occasionally reported fleeting signs that might have suggested the plane's path: smoke rising in the distance, a glint of metal reflecting sunlight across a glacial moraine. But none of these observations were ever confirmed. Each report fizzled into speculation as investigators raced to verify details that remained frustratingly intangible. The sheer scale of the Alaskan Triangle meant that any small anomaly could go undetected or be misidentified, reinforcing the sense that the disappearance was not just a failure of search efforts, but a reflection of the land's capacity to absorb human error and human presence alike. In the absence of evidence, the aircraft became a phantom in the collective memory, a silent witness to the forces that had claimed it. Natural features of the region further obscured the aircraft. Glacial crevasses, avalanche-prone slopes, and dense river valleys acted as hidden vaults, swallowing the plane and its occupants without leaving a discernible mark. Seasonal changes could rapidly cover or move debris, with snow and ice concealing impact sites and streams transporting lighter fragments far from the crash zone. Even decades later, teams using advanced imaging and infrared surveys failed to reveal any trace, suggesting that the disappearance was not simply a matter of bad luck, but of the environment asserting an unyielding control over outcomes. The Alaskan Triangle, notorious for such vanishings, seem to have claimed this aircraft in a way that left no recoverable evidence. Repeated searches over the years, applying modern satellite technology and terrain analysis, have similarly failed to locate the C-54D. Investigators, historians, and aviation enthusiasts have scoured maps, photos, and historical flight records in hopes of narrowing the search zone, but the vastness and complexity of the wilderness consistently frustrate these efforts. The mystery of the lost Douglas C-54D remains a reference point for the Triangle's reputation, illustrating the capacity of terrain, weather, and isolation to erase both evidence and certainty. Its disappearance is a stark reminder that even routine flights, when intersecting with this unforgiving region, can vanish without a trace, leaving questions that resist closure. The Douglas C-54D remains a symbol of the Alaska Triangle's enduring power over human ventures, a reminder that geography and climate can overwhelm preparation and experience alike. Every analysis, every speculative route, and every renewed search has confirmed one truth. In this region, human activity is always at the mercy of forces far larger and more indifferent than comprehension allows. Somewhere beneath glaciers, rivers, and shadowed valleys, 44 lives lie hidden, their fate forever intertwined with a wilderness that refuses to release its secrets. The missing Cessna over the Chugach Range. The Cessna lifted smoothly into the morning light, its single engine betraying none of the hidden dangers that awaited over the jagged peaks of the Chugach Range. What began as a routine flight quickly intersected with a landscape known for sudden shifts in weather and treacherous terrain, a combination that could challenge even the most experienced pilot. The small aircraft carried one pilot and minimal equipment, a testament to the modest scale of aviation that often sustains communities in Alaska's remote interior. The Chugach Range, with its glaciers, steep ridges, and hidden valleys, has claimed countless travelers over the decades, and the disappearance of this Cessna became another enduring enigma tied to the region often referred to as the Alaska Triangle. Despite the plane's short flight plan, investigators would later confront the same patterns seen in other vanishings, familiar routes rendered perilous by weather, terrain, and the limits of human perception. In the cockpit, dials and gauges reflected both the pilot's confidence and the aircraft's modest design, a combination that offered reassurance yet little margin for error in Alaskan air. The pilot had experience navigating the region and was accustomed to the challenges posed by small aircraft in mountainous terrain, yet even skill could not account for the rapid changes in wind and visibility characteristic of the Chugach. The Cessna itself, a reliable model designed for short to medium-range flights, offered dependable performance but lacked the redundancy of larger aircraft, leaving little room for error once conditions became adverse. Instruments could guide, but they could not negate the effect of gusts, turbulence, or sudden cloud formation, all of which the region produces with unpredictable regularity. The combination of equipment, experience, and familiarity might have seemed sufficient, yet the Triangle has long demonstrated that confidence does not guarantee safety. Below, the mountains extended endlessly, glaciers slicing through valleys and ridges rising steeply, presenting obstacles that could turn routine navigation into a perilous challenge. Peaks cast long shadows over deep valleys, masking the terrain beneath and complicating visual judgment. Glacial crevasses and snowfields stretched across slopes, often concealed by drifting snow or cloud cover, creating an environment where every miscalculation could prove fatal. Pilots in the region often rely on visual cues and known landmarks, yet the Chugach's constantly shifting environment makes even familiar routes unpredictable. The narrow corridors of passage force planes to thread between ridges, while rapidly changing conditions can obscure these natural channels almost instantaneously, a factor that has contributed to multiple disappearances over the years. Wind patterns shifted suddenly, moving between peaks in unpredictable surges, while clouds gathered in thick banks that could obscure even prominent summits within moments. The Triangle is notorious for these microclimates, where sunlight, temperature, and terrain interact to produce turbulence that can destabilize small aircraft. Pilots must continually adjust altitude and heading, yet even minor variations can escalate in such confined spaces, turning ordinary gusts into dangerous downdrafts. Meteorological records confirm that the Chugach Range can produce conditions that fluctuate over mere minutes, leaving aircraft exposed to rapidly changing hazards that cannot be anticipated with certainty. These forces, combined with the steep topography, set the stage for a disappearance in which human observation and technology can only offer limited protection. Radio transmissions ceased without warning, leaving only incomplete logs that hinted at a route swallowed by the vast wilderness and the limits of tracking technology at the time. The lack of distress signals or emergency communication added to the mystery, depriving search teams of any precise location or indication of what the pilot encountered. Radar coverage for small aircraft in the interior was minimal, and tracking relied heavily on intermittent reports from ground stations that could not penetrate mountainous regions consistently. As a result, the aircraft simply vanished from available records, leaving investigators to speculate on its last known position based solely on the flight plan and fragmented sightings. The sudden absence underscored the danger of flying in the Alaska Triangle and highlighted the region's ability to erase human presence without a trace. Rescue teams advanced cautiously over snow-laden slopes and frozen rivers, confronting terrain that mirrored the hazards the pilot had faced alone, yet revealing nothing of the missing plane. Ground parties encountered deep snow, unstable ice, and hidden crevasses that made extensive coverage nearly impossible, while aerial reconnaissance was hampered by clouds and poor visibility. The search efforts, although comprehensive for the time, were constrained by both geography and the limitations of available technology. Despite a combination of manpower, aircraft, and rudimentary equipment, no wreckage or personal effects surfaced, leaving the plane's final fate entirely unknown. The region seemed to absorb every attempt at discovery, creating a sense that the disappearance was not just accidental, but orchestrated by the wilderness itself. Subsequent aerial sweeps and foot searches uncovered no debris, as if the Chugach Range itself had erased every trace of human presence in its frozen corridors. Investigators noted that even minor disturbances, such as downed trees or displaced snow, could be concealed quickly by wind and precipitation. Reports of potential sightings, a glint of metal here, smoke rising faintly there, remained unverified and faded into the vastness of the mountains. Each attempt to reconstruct the flight's path or locate the aircraft met the same blank horizon, reinforcing a haunting pattern seen in other Alaska Triangle disappearances. The region's immensity and relentless environmental forces ensured that what vanished might remain forever hidden. Avalanche-prone slopes, hidden crevasses, and dense forest concealed whatever fate had befallen the aircraft, ensuring that decades of investigation yielded only silence. Environmental studies of the Chugach confirm that ice fields can shift dramatically over time, moving snow, rock, and debris in ways that render prior searches effectively obsolete. River channels and glacial meltwater can carry smaller fragments far from the presumed impact area, leaving only speculation about the aircraft's final resting place. The terrain's combination of isolation, dynamic movement, and concealment has challenged every search effort, leaving the story suspended between the known flight plan and the unknown forces that claimed it. For pilots who traverse the Triangle, the loss of a small plane serves as a sobering reminder that skill and preparation meet limits imposed by forces beyond control. Aviation manuals, flight logs, and historical records all emphasize the dangers inherent in Alaskan mountain flying, particularly over ranges like the Chugach. Even seasoned aviators recognize that minor miscalculations can be fatal and that environmental factors often outweigh human judgment. The disappearance of this Cessna fits into a pattern of vanishings that have cemented the Alaska Triangle's reputation, demonstrating that even the smallest aircraft is subject to the vastness and unpredictability of the land. High among the peaks and hidden within the valleys, the lost Cessna lingers unseen, a quiet testament to the wilderness's refusal to surrender its secrets. The climbers who vanished on Mendenhall Towers. The climbers began their ascent of Mendenhall Towers with methodical precision, yet the vertical expanse soon swallowed them from sight, leaving only the echoes of their progress behind. The expedition, consisting of experienced mountaineers familiar with Alaskan peaks, set out along routes considered challenging but within the skill set of the team. Despite their preparation and careful planning, the tower's imposing faces and glacial surroundings created an environment where control over every move was fleeting. The incident would later be catalogued among the disappearances associated with the Alaska Triangle, a stretch of terrain notorious for swallowing travelers and adventurers alike, leaving questions that endured decades later. Even before the ascent began, the looming presence of jagged cliffs and shifting ice suggested that the wilderness could assert its authority at any moment. Each carried experience honed on Alaskan peaks and other demanding ranges, their preparation meticulous, yet no skill could predict the hazards they would face on this climb. They were outfitted with ropes, ice axes, crampons and protective clothing, suited for the unpredictability of high-altitude ice and rock. Their training encompassed technical climbing, glacier navigation, and avalanche awareness, all critical for survival on the tower's precarious faces. Despite such expertise, the combination of vertical exposure and complex terrain in a region shaped by glaciers, wind, and seasonal melt rendered every decision a potential turning point between safety and disaster. Experience offered confidence, but it could not guarantee preservation when the forces of nature themselves remained unknowable. The towers rise sharply from the glacial expanse, jagged pinnacles and sheer faces forming a labyrinth that tests both technical skill and endurance. The granite spires jut upward with little respite, interspersed with snowfields that can hide crevasses and thin ice bridges. Vertical relief often exceeded what climbers had encountered in previous expeditions, with walls that required sustained use of ropes and careful weight distribution to maintain balance. Even minor miscalculations could result in catastrophic falls, and the topography's complexity allowed multiple unseen hazards to exist simultaneously. The Mendenhall Tower's reputation among the climbing community is built on both challenge and danger, drawing skilled individuals while maintaining the potential for sudden tragedy. Snowdrifts shifted unpredictably along the ridges, and ice formations threatened to collapse under even the slightest pressure, transforming familiar passages into treacherous unknowns. Seasonal temperature fluctuations loosened rock and ice alike, creating hidden hazards that could manifest without warning. Thin layers of snow concealed cracks in the underlying glacier, while seracs overhung vertical faces, poised to release without notice. The climbers' careful steps became a negotiation with forces beyond control, each handhold and foothold measured against the uncertainty of shifting ice and unstable rock. Such conditions demanded constant vigilance, yet even the most attentive climbers could not anticipate the full range of dangers inherent to the towers. Observers at the base noted the climbers' steady advance until they vanished behind a wall of granite and ice, with no further communication to indicate their exact position. Initially, small radio exchanges confirmed their route and progress, but transmissions ceased as the team moved into more remote faces of the towers. The last verified sighting placed them ascending a particularly isolated ridge, with no nearby features that could be used for visual tracking. The sudden absence left friends, colleagues, and authorities with a chilling realization. The climbers had entered a zone where the landscape itself could obscure any human presence entirely, and time would erode the chance of immediate rescue. Navigating seracs and crevassed fields, rescue teams approached cautiously, yet even aerial searches struggled against the towering walls and the labyrinthine glaciers. Helicopters could reach only so far before downdrafts and unpredictable winds rendered further flight hazardous, while ground parties were slowed by unstable ice, hidden cracks, and steep rocky inclines. Every attempt to reconstruct the climber's route confronted the limitations imposed by terrain that seemed deliberately convoluted. Despite a coordinated response involving experienced mountaineers and search personnel, the towers revealed no trace of the missing party, leaving only speculation and fragments of observation to guide further efforts. Days turned into weeks as follow-up expeditions scoured every plausible route, employing every available technique, yet the climbers left no discernible trace. Investigators documented the region's geology and glacier behavior to predict likely locations for accident debris, but shifting ice and snowfall obscured potential evidence almost as quickly as it might appear. Even the most minute signs, a displaced rock, a faint imprint in snow, proved elusive, vanishing beneath the tower's dynamic surfaces. The lack of recoverable remains or equipment reinforced the narrative of the Alaska Triangle as a domain where disappearance does not require malice or error. The landscape alone can absorb those who enter it. Falling rock, sudden ice fractures, and hidden crevasses could conceal human presence instantly, leaving the environment as both obstacle and veil. Geological surveys of the towers confirm that seracs and overhanging ice are prone to collapse without warning, a hazard compounded by freeze-thaw cycles and glacial movement. Crevasses form deep hidden fissures that are difficult to detect from above, even with careful observation. Such naturally occurring dangers provide a factual framework for understanding why the climber's fate remains unknown, demonstrating how skill, preparation and experience can still be rendered insufficient by the physical realities of the towers. Mountaineers familiar with the triangle speak of routes where preparation meets uncertainty, where a single misstep can erase even the most cautious efforts, a tension that shadows every expedition. The culture of climbing in Alaska acknowledges the constant interplay of risk and reward, yet incidents like this underscore the absolute unpredictability inherent to the region. Every ascent carries the silent understanding that nature's magnitude can render human endeavour inconsequential, and that memory, record and observation may be the only remnants of those who vanish. The Mendenhall Towers stand as monuments to both achievement and mystery, their vertical walls concealing secrets with a patience no human can match. Perched among the ice-choked ridges and jagged pinnacles of Mendenhall Towers, the climbers remain suspended in a silence that no search has yet disturbed. Paul Lemaitre's last steps on Mount Marathon. Mount Marathon rose sharply above the town of Seward, its jagged ridges etched against the sky, a silent sentinel that had challenged every runner daring to race its unforgiving slope, including Paul Lemaitre on that fateful day. The mountain's imposing silhouette framed the start line of the annual Mount Marathon race, a contest that had drawn competitors for decades to test speed, endurance, and nerve against nearly vertical terrain. Local spectators lined the streets below, unaware that the mountain's history included both triumph and tragedy, and that even well-prepared participants could find themselves lost to its shifting slopes. Lemaitre, a runner known in regional circles for both stamina and precision, stepped into that history, unaware how quickly familiarity could turn to peril in a place that demanded constant vigilance. Lemaitre was no stranger to endurance races or steep terrain, his training honed over years of local competitions, yet the mountain's reputation for sudden hazards cast a shadow over even the most prepared athletes. His regimen included long runs over coastal ridges, technical drills on rocky trails, and careful acclimatization to rapid altitude changes. Fellow racers described him as methodical, measured in his pace, and deeply aware of the mountain's capacity for danger. Yet Mount Marathon's challenges could exceed preparation alone. Loose gravel, unseen crevices, and abrupt elevation changes created a landscape where even a momentary lapse of focus could have lasting consequences. It was precisely these variables that would make Lemaitre's last moments impossible to reconstruct fully. The route twisted along exposed ledges and loose scree with steep gradients that forced each runner to balance speed against the constant risk of misstep on rock or ice. Sections of the course required careful foot placement on narrow ridges that dropped sharply on either side, while jagged rocks protruded from the surface, threatening twisted ankles or worse. Beneath the eye of spectators, these hazards were invisible, their true scale only evident from the precarious angles experienced mid-ascent. The mountain demanded precision, not merely strength, turning every step into a negotiation between momentum and caution, speed and survival. Wind gusts swept unpredictably across the summit ridge, carrying temperatures that fluctuated sharply and creating patches of slick snow hidden among jagged rocks. Sunlight reflected off scattered ice crystals, sometimes blinding runners momentarily, while shaded recesses retained frost even as the day warmed. These microclimates transformed brief sections of the trail into unseen traps, where solid footing could disappear without warning. Lemaitre's training had familiarized him with variable conditions, yet even expert awareness could not fully counteract the mountain's capricious forces, leaving him vulnerable to the sudden hazards that defined Mount Marathon. Race officials and fellow runners observed Lemaitre as he advanced steadily along the treacherous sections, but a sudden gap in sightline soon swallowed him from view, leaving only fleeting indications of his presence. Shouts from below carried faintly, echoes caught in the folds of rock and snow, but no one could track his precise location as he entered a steep, twisting portion of the ridge. Sporadic glimpses suggested careful footing, yet these moments disappeared behind a wall of stone, scree, and the natural folds of the mountain. Within minutes, Lemaitre had moved beyond the range of both human sight and the limited signals of early communication, leaving only the uncertainty of what the ridge might conceal. Scattered debris and shifted gravel suggested the difficulty of maintaining footing, though it remained impossible to determine whether fatigue, environmental forces, or a combination of both had caused any stumble. Tiny stones displaced along the route hinted at the passage of a runner, yet the mountain's natural instability could account for the same marks. Small, subtle clues that might have indicated a faltering step were quickly obscured by wind or subsequent runners, erasing evidence almost as swiftly as it appeared. For observers, the mountain offered no guidance, only the silent testimony of its angles, crevices, and loose scree, each element capable of hiding what had occurred. Surveying accessible slopes and gullies, search teams struggled against the mountain's irregular topography, limited visibility, and the sheer vertical drops that interrupted every line of sight. Volunteers and authorities moved carefully across sections known for rockfall, avoiding areas where steep walls ended abruptly and crevices too deep to survey. The ridgelines, intersecting gullies, and jagged ledges made systematic coverage nearly impossible, forcing teams to prioritize zones with the highest likelihood of finding a trace. Even seasoned climbers among the searchers recognized that Mount Marathon, like much of the Alaska Triangle, could erase the presence of a human in ways that no map, team, or technology could fully anticipate. Even aerial reconnaissance yielded little, as shadows, rock formations, and snowfields masked potential evidence, ensuring that the smallest traces of Lemaitre's passage could remain invisible indefinitely. Helicopters and drones hovered over likely routes, scanning with thermal imaging and visual observation, yet the mountain's contours created blind spots where even a brief glint of clothing or equipment could vanish from view. Compounding the difficulty, shifting light and snow patterns made stationary objects nearly indistinguishable from natural terrain. Each effort to reconstruct the ascent confronted the fundamental reality that Mount Marathon's surface could hide what happened with absolute impartiality. For athletes and locals alike, the incident underscored how a single misjudgment, environmental shift, or hidden hazard could erase a person's presence, leaving only unanswered questions. Discussions in race forums and local accounts reflected both admiration for Lemaitre's skill and bewilderment at the sudden disappearance, with each retelling reinforcing the sense that even experience and preparation could offer no guarantee. The mountain had become a silent witness, concealing movement, effort, and perhaps tragedy within its folds, a reminder of the fragile boundary between human determination and nature's unpredictability. The last trace of Paul Lemaitre vanished into Mount Marathon's twisting ridges, leaving only the question of where the mountain had claimed him. The snow machiner whose tracks ended in nowhere. The frozen expanse stretched unbroken beneath the pale winter sun, tracks snaking across the snow until they abruptly vanished, marking the last known journey of a snow machiner within the Alaska Triangle. The rider had set out along a remote backcountry trail that wove between wooded valleys, frozen rivers, and open tundra, each mile carrying him farther from towns and roads. Even in daylight, the vast whiteness distorted distances and concealed the subtle rises and drops that could suddenly swallow a machine or human from sight. For those aware of the Alaska Triangle's reputation, the disappearance of a solitary snow machiner was a reminder that isolation could transform ordinary travel into an enduring mystery. Skilled in winter navigation and familiar with backcountry risks, the rider had spent years traversing icy valleys and frozen rivers, each expedition reinforcing both confidence and caution. His snow machine was meticulously maintained, equipped for long distances and sudden cold snaps, and he carried spare fuel and emergency supplies. Companions who knew his routines emphasized that he was careful, deliberate, and aware of the hazards that even seasoned travelers could overlook. Yet preparation alone offered no immunity in a landscape where ice could crack unseen, snow could drift unpredictably, and the land itself seemed to move with its own rhythms. Trees laden with snow formed tunnels along certain sections, while open plains and glacial ridges offered no protection from the elements, transforming a routine ride into a delicate negotiation with the land. The terrain alternated between densely forested corridors, where branches scraped and slowed the machine, and wide, unbroken fields where a momentary miscalculation could send a rider sliding over hidden crevices. Each environment posed different threats, requiring constant adaptation, yet the abruptness with which the snow machine vanished suggested the mountain's hazards could overtake even the most prepared traveller in seconds. Gusting winds and sudden snow squalls altered visibility within moments, scattering powder and masking previously clear paths, rendering navigation and tracking increasingly hazardous. Wind shifts could bury tracks almost as quickly as they were made, and shadows cast by low winter sunlight could hide subtle rises and dips, turning otherwise traversable snowfields into invisible traps. Equipment like compasses or early GPS devices offered guidance, but these tools could not compensate for the unpredictability of drifting snow and ice, or the sudden drops hidden beneath a seemingly smooth surface. The path had been followed with careful precision, yet at a certain point the tracks ended abruptly, leaving only a faint disturbance in the snow that disappeared into the whiteness. Companions reported that the line of movement seemed to taper, as if swallowed by the terrain itself, and subsequent attempts to trace the path produced no continuity. In an expanse already stripped of landmarks, the sudden cessation of the snow machine's passage created a disquieting sense of absence, raising questions about what could have caused such an abrupt disappearance. Thin ice along rivers, hidden snowdrifts, and possible mechanical failure offered tangible explanations, yet none could be confirmed. Crevasses concealed by snow might have claimed the machine silently, or a sudden malfunction could have left the rider stranded and invisible amid the frozen landscape. Even minor errors in judgment, slightly excessive speed over uncertain terrain, or underestimating the depth of a drift, could have catastrophic results, and in such conditions, the difference between minor delay and permanent disappearance could be measured in seconds. The surrounding ridges and frozen valleys were carefully examined, yet the snow's shifting surface and hidden gullies rendered any signs of passage nearly invisible, leaving no clue to where the tracks had vanished. Low sunlight accentuated the whiteness and erased shadows, while wind subtly rearranged snow along the edges of drifts, erasing footprints and machine tracks alike. Any evidence that might have indicated directional struggle was already concealed by the natural movement of the environment, leaving the wilderness as the sole witness to what had occurred. Even repeated passes along likely routes, aided by distant aerial glimpses and tracking equipment, failed to reveal any evidence. The relentless winds and drifting snow erasing all traces as if the wilderness had swallowed them completely. Helicopters hovered over ridges, and drones scanned open plains, yet every potential clue was either obscured or transformed by the dynamic winter conditions. The combination of remoteness, weather, and shifting terrain meant that even the most sophisticated tracking techniques offered only a fleeting hope of discovering a definitive outcome. For those who knew the Alaska Triangle's extremes, the disappearance served as a chilling reminder that the land could render experience and preparation irrelevant. Travelers accustomed to the rhythms of ice and snow understood that an entire machine and its operator could vanish in moments, leaving only the landscape itself as a record of their passage. The sudden erasure of a presence in such a place underscored a vulnerability unique to this wilderness, where even modern technology sometimes faltered, and the margin for error was vanishingly small. In the vast white wilderness, the snow machiner's path simply ended, leaving only the silent question of what swallowed a person in a landscape that revealed nothing. The Buckland hunter lost to the interior. Tall spruce and birch trees stretched endlessly, their trunks dark against the snow-covered floor, setting the stage for a hunter whose last steps into the Alaskan interior remain a mystery. The wilderness pressed outward in all directions, silent except for the occasional groan of shifting ice and the distant call of a raven, leaving the human presence tiny and ephemeral. Snow crunched under hidden rocks and ice patches, a subtle reminder that even well-trodden paths could conceal danger. For those familiar with the region, the Alaska Triangle had long been a place where even experienced travelers could vanish into the expanse of frozen rivers, dense forests, and untracked snow. The hunter's disappearance would come to exemplify that peril, a single life swallowed in a landscape that revealed almost nothing. Years of experience had honed his senses to the rhythms of the forest, yet even familiarity with rivers, ridges, and wildlife offered no guarantee against sudden misfortune. He carried a rifle, survival gear, and provisions for several days, trusting in both preparation and his intimate knowledge of animal trails, frozen crossings, and hidden game paths. Locals who had accompanied him in previous hunting seasons described him as careful, observant, and deliberate, moving through the interior with a skill honed over decades. That experience made the disappearance all the more confounding, as no simple lapse could explain how someone so versed in the land could vanish entirely. He had marked landmarks with subtle notches on birch bark and memorized river crossings, yet these measures could not protect him from the interior's unpredictable shifts. Frozen streams cut through valleys, and rolling tundra opened into flat expanses where tracks could be easily lost or erased by wind and shifting snow. Fallen logs, hidden sinkholes, and snow-covered depressions could conceal even the most deliberate passage, leaving only faint disturbances in the surface. Wildlife, moose, wolves, or lynx, moved along predictable paths, but the hunter's presence could have been altered by unexpected conditions, a snowdrift suddenly concealing footprints, or a river crossing turning treacherous. Each element of the interior contributed to a landscape where disappearance could occur almost invisibly, and even the most precise tracking could offer only fleeting clues. Thick fog and intermittent snowfalls reduced visibility, while bitter gusts carried the scent of pine and distant earth, complicating navigation with every step. Light shifted quickly across the valleys, and the low winter sun cast deceptive shadows over frozen terrain. Even with a compass, maps, and local experience, the hunter confronted an environment that refused to yield clear orientation, where a single misjudged ridge or hidden drift could send him off course. Birds skimming over river bends and the occasional snapping of frozen twigs punctuated the silence, underscoring how easily a single person could be lost among the vast topography. Companions recalled the hunter moving steadily along a ridgeline before his trail abruptly ended, leaving only a faint impression of his passage that vanished into the wilderness. Reports indicated that he had appeared confident, tracking game and checking landmarks with the precision of someone used to reading the land. Yet at some point the footprints stopped, the snow beneath his boots apparently undisturbed beyond a certain line. For those following his intended route, the abrupt cessation was a chilling void, a point where the known world met the unknown, and imagination filled the silence with possibilities both mundane and terrifying. Hidden crevices, rapidly forming snowdrifts, and sudden river crossings created potential hazards that could explain an otherwise inexplicable disappearance. Ice that appeared solid might conceal a frigid current, and overhanging snow cornices along riverbanks could collapse without warning. A sudden snowstorm could erase even recent tracks, leaving no record of movement, while steep inclines and narrow passes presented opportunities for missteps that could prove fatal. Even experienced hunters could underestimate subtle changes in terrain or snow consistency, particularly in the interior, where the wilderness itself often altered faster than human perception could track. Signs that might have revealed his direction, bent branches, displaced snow, disturbed underbrush, were subtle, easily concealed, and often erased by the forest's quiet reclaiming of the terrain. Even where tracks were noted briefly, wind and drifting snow obscured them within hours, leaving no continuity for those who sought to retrace his path. The interior's rhythms were indifferent. Nature's processes moved silently and efficiently to erase any trace of a human passage, preserving the land while rendering human presence transient and uncertain. Every crevice, hollow, and drift became a potential erasure point, each one a reason why a trail could simply end. Repeated passes along likely routes yielded no definitive evidence. The combination of drifting snow, shadows, and the dense forest masked any remaining signs. Valleys that appeared straightforward from above concealed crevices and abrupt drops, while frozen streams offered no guarantee of supporting weight. Attempts to reconstruct the path with technological aids, binoculars, early GPS devices, or aerial reconnaissance provided no clarity, and the land itself seemed to resist observation, folding the hunter's presence back into its endless folds. Even as daylight waned, the forest seemed to reclaim every disturbance, as though the interior itself had a way of hiding secrets too well to be found. The wide interior stretched beyond any clear line of sight, its frozen rivers and shadowed forests concealing every footstep, every possible clue, as if the land itself had absorbed the hunter without leaving a trace. Even those who had spent years in the region acknowledged that the wilderness could erase a presence, leaving only speculation and the faintest hints in snow or ice. A windblown ridge, a hidden creek, or a sudden snowdrift could erase the last proof of life in an instant, leaving an enduring puzzle for those who would later attempt to explain the disappearance. Amid the frozen valleys and dense spruce of the Alaskan interior, the hunter vanished completely, leaving only the silent enigma of a trail that ceased to exist. The bush pilot's final radio call. The hum of the aircraft's engine vibrated through the cockpit, steady yet insistent, as the bush pilot navigated a route that had become routine yet remained unforgiving. His voice carried calm authority over the radio waves, detailing coordinates, heading, and estimated time of arrival, a series of precise statements that belied the complexity of piloting a small aircraft over the Alaskan Triangle. Even seasoned pilots acknowledged that these skies, remote and unpredictable, could erase the most meticulous of plans, yet he had flown here countless times before, relying on skill, intuition, and experience honed over decades. This flight, meant to be routine, would leave only a haunting echo in the record books, the last transmission signalling the final confirmation of life before disappearance. Years of navigating the vast Alaskan interior had sharpened his instincts. He could read instrument panels almost as intuitively as the terrain below, adjusting throttle, rudder, and flaps with split-second precision to account for sudden wind gusts, turbulence, or ice accumulation. Familiarity with flight paths did not eliminate the uncertainty inherent in bush flying, where minor misjudgments could prove fatal in seconds. Today he monitored the gauges with unwavering focus, cross-referencing altitude, airspeed, and heading while noting landmarks below, all the while maintaining radio contact with dispatch and regional control points. His final transmission came in measured tones, steady yet slightly clipped, relaying his position relative to nearby ridges and river bends. Approaching waypoint, he reported, estimated arrival in 10 minutes. There was no hint of alarm, no audible struggle, only the crisp cadence of a pilot conducting standard reporting. Yet in hindsight, the call marked a threshold between certainty and disappearance. Each word, each pause would be scrutinized later for subtle signs of distress that were imperceptible in real time. The precision of the communication contrasted starkly with what was to follow: silence, total and inexplicable, settling across the frequencies he had just spoken through. Even as the final words faded into static, the limits of technology became evident. Tracking systems, dependent on line of sight and repeater stations, could offer only fragmented guidance. Signals bounced off mountains or were obscured by snow-laden valleys. Communication that appeared reliable from dispatch centers often vanished unpredictably, leaving colleagues to piece together routes from partial data and assumptions. This limitation underscored the isolation of the pilot's position and the helplessness of those attempting to determine his fate once radio silence descended. The flight required constant attention to subtle changes in instrument readings. A slight fluctuation in airspeed, a minor shift in heading, or a brief needle deviation on the altimeter could indicate turbulence, icing, or a mechanical anomaly. For the bush pilot, these adjustments were second nature, a rhythm learned through countless hours of vigilance. Every turn of the yoke, every adjustment of flaps or throttle, was a negotiation with forces largely beyond human control, demanding both reflex and judgment. In the Alaskan Triangle, even routine adjustments could be critical, separating safe passage from tragedy. Complicating matters, intermittent static and fading signals challenged the interpretation of communications. Dispatch could hear fragments, some indistinct, leaving only context and experience to infer meaning. No subsequent replies came, and attempts to triangulate the plane's exact position proved fruitless. The transmission, intended as reassurance of progress, instead became a silent marker, a last trace of activity swallowed by the immensity of airspace and terrain. For those listening, the absence of further communication was more telling than any words spoken. The unpredictability of flight in such a region meant that even the most cautious pilot was vulnerable. Sudden gusts could shift the plane's course by degrees, cumulatively leading off the intended path. Ice could form almost imperceptibly, affecting lift and control. A momentary lapse in instrument interpretation, or a necessary maneuver to compensate for unexpected conditions, could cascade into a situation from which recovery was impossible. In this context, the final radio call was both a confirmation of skill and an unwitting testament to the limits of human control over the skies. Attempts to locate the plane relied on aerial and technological resources, each constrained by distance, line of sight, and the irregularity of signals in mountainous regions. Observers could scan ridges, river valleys, and open expanses, but the small aircraft could be hidden by the lay of the land, the subtle camouflage of snow, or the limits of optical detection. Each minute without contact amplified the sense of uncertainty, emphasizing how quickly a familiar flight path could become unknowable. For all intents and purposes, the pilot had entered a domain where even mastery of the skies offered no guarantee of visibility or survival. Reflection on the event underscored the vulnerability inherent in bush flying within the Alaska Triangle. Experience, preparation, and adherence to procedure could only mitigate risk, never eliminate it. The disappearance exemplified how technology, human skill, and routine protocols intersect with unpredictability, leaving gaps where explanation cannot reach. In the silence that followed the final transmission, the combination of isolation, technical limitations, and environmental unpredictability converged to erase both plane and pilot from immediate perception. High above the vast wilderness, the bush pilot vanished from view and voice, leaving only the haunting resonance of a final call unanswered. The fisherman found without his boat. The fisherman was discovered along the riverbank in the early hours of the morning, his gear neatly arranged as if he had paused for a moment, yet the boat that had carried him was gone, leaving an unsettling emptiness where logic should have prevailed. Locals who arrived first could not immediately reconcile the scene. The man stood there unharmed, yet his vessel had vanished without a trace. No signs of capsizing, no drift downstream, nothing to hint at its sudden absence. The Alaska Triangle, known for swallowing the unwary in both sky and land, had here claimed its most ordinary victim, turning the familiar act of river navigation into a baffling enigma that left even seasoned residents silent with unease. Time spent on these waters had made him adept at reading currents, identifying shoals, and predicting the pull of tides against wind. He had earned a reputation for reliability, skill, and caution, and his familiarity with the local river systems was extensive. Yet none of that knowledge could illuminate the circumstances of the day's events. The boat's disappearance defied not only expectation, but the very principles of what a skilled mariner could anticipate. Observers later remarked that he seemed to stand in a calm certainty, unaware of what had occurred, or perhaps comprehending it in a way that eluded everyone else. That morning began with all the hallmarks of routine: nets checked and repaired, tackle sorted, and lines coiled in precise order. The river ran smooth under an early sun, its reflective surface giving no hint of the subtle currents and hidden eddies that could challenge even the most attentive navigator. He had launched his boat with careful attention, manoeuvring it into familiar channels, as he had countless times before, each stroke of the oar and adjustment of rudder performed with practiced precision. To those watching from shore, there was no reason for concern, yet within hours the ordinary rhythm of his labour would be interrupted by a phenomenon that no explanation could fully satisfy. Neighbours and fellow fishermen were the first to notice the anomaly. The shoreline was empty where the boat should have been, yet the fisherman remained upright, as though the vessel had been erased rather than displaced. Initial assumptions leaned toward accident or minor misadventure, but a closer inspection offered no reassurance. No overturned hull, no visible line of drift, no indication of struggle. The scene contradicted every expectation of how a boat could vanish, presenting an unsettling puzzle that drew attention far beyond the immediate riverbank. Investigators approached the mystery methodically, examining every detail along the river's edge. Logs were displaced slightly from their natural alignment, and ripples hinted at recent movement in shallow waters, yet no coherent trail led from the shore to any conceivable endpoint. A paddle lay nearby, yet its position did not indicate deliberate placement or careless drop. Each item, each subtle clue, was catalogued meticulously, yet the absence of the boat rendered interpretation nearly impossible. The ordinary rules of navigation, physics, and human behaviour seemed suspended, leaving only questions. Floating fragments of rope and a single empty cooler suggested movement, yet they could not account for the craft itself. Currents, though moderate, were incapable of carrying the boat far without leaving a trace, and no other vessels reported contact or interference. Even the smallest inconsistencies, the angle of a floating net, the indentation of a boot print in mud, served only to deepen the sense of impossibility. Every observation reinforced the paradox. The fisherman remained, the boat gone, and no combination of natural forces or human action appeared sufficient to explain it. Local lore and oral history lent an eerie resonance to the disappearance. Stories of waters that could hide vessels and currents that altered perception were common, passed down through generations of those living along the Alaska Triangle's rivers. While these accounts were often dismissed as exaggeration, they provided a cultural context for understanding why such disappearances could remain unresolved. Here, in the heart of the triangle, even the mundane could take on a mystifying quality, and the river itself became a character in a narrative that eluded explanation. The vulnerability of those who traversed these waters was brought into sharp focus by the incident. An experienced fisherman, confident in skill and judgment, could vanish from sight without a single witness or accident to explain it. Familiarity with the environment offered no protection against whatever unseen force or circumstance had removed his boat, leaving a man in full command of his faculties suddenly dependent on conjecture and speculation. It was a quiet but profound reminder of how even ordinary routines could intersect with extraordinary mystery. Consideration of the disappearance extended beyond immediate observation, hinting at the broader pattern of unexplained vanishings within the Alaska Triangle. Unlike aerial accidents or mountain climbing tragedies, this case involved no extreme terrain or sudden storm, yet it shared the same essence: a human being removed from expected circumstances without a trace. The ordinary setting magnified the strangeness, emphasizing that mystery could reside not just in vast wilderness or violent weather, but within the most familiar spaces where people thought themselves safe. On the riverbank where he was found, the missing boat left behind only questions that refused to drift away. The drowned woman in Resurrection Bay. A woman familiar with the waters of Resurrection Bay prepared for a routine outing, moving with the ease of someone who had spent years along its shores. The bay, situated within the area often referred to as the Alaska Triangle, had long claimed lives in ways that left little explanation. That morning, she followed a path she'd taken countless times before, checking gear and tracing familiar channels, unaware that ordinary knowledge could not shield her from the inexplicable forces at play. Her movements were precise, practiced, and deliberate, a testament to experience. Yet the day would end in a way that would puzzle both residents and authorities alike. Locals who often frequented the bay recalled seeing her launch small watercraft with care, adjusting sails and inspecting lines before moving into the sheltered inlets. She'd been seen alone that morning, yet no one reported unusual weather or turbulent water conditions at the time. What had always been a simple routine, a familiar engagement with the tide and currents, became the setting for an event that defied logic and expectation. The familiarity that usually offered safety seemed irrelevant in the face of an outcome that left no immediate answers. Her last confirmed movements were noted by a fellow fisherwoman, who described watching her navigate the bay as she had hundreds of times, moving steadily across calm waters. There was no sign of distress, no sudden struggle, nothing to indicate that danger was imminent. Yet hours later, when the bay's calm was broken by the approach of those seeking her, the reality of what had occurred became apparent. She had drowned, though the circumstances remained baffling and unexplainable. Those who first came across the scene were struck by its quiet incompleteness. There were no overturned vessels, no signs of collision, and no immediate evidence of why the water had claimed her life. Equipment remained secured, floating in place or washed lightly against the shore, suggesting a sudden but not violent end. For investigators, the absence of an obvious explanation transformed the bay itself into a puzzle. Familiar, navigable waters had produced an outcome that resisted understanding. Authorities carefully retraced her route, mapping the channels she was known to follow and analysing tides and currents for irregularities that might account for an accident. Water temperatures were within normal seasonal ranges, and there were no reports of hazardous marine life or sudden weather changes during the time in question. The analysis revealed no obvious cause, leaving the incident suspended between plausible accident and inexplicable event, a distinction that would haunt the investigation. Minor anomalies added to the mystery. Her life vest remained secured yet had not functioned to prevent drowning. Items of equipment were in place, yet their position suggested she had not struggled extensively before submersion. Witnesses offered accounts that conflicted in small ways, describing movement patterns or minor sounds that could neither be verified nor fully explained. Each detail, when combined, created a narrative that resisted conventional reasoning and left room for speculation about the strange and unpredictable qualities of the Alaska Triangle. Historically, Resurrection Bay has been the site of unexplained incidents, including drownings and disappearances that left few traces. While local law often magnified risk, the repeated emergence of seemingly routine accidents elevated concern. The waters themselves were deceptively calm, and even experienced individuals could be overcome by currents, sudden shifts, or factors imperceptible to observers. In this case, the convergence of human familiarity and the bay's unpredictable potential underscored the region's capacity for mystery. The incident also highlighted the limitations of human observation and intervention. Those who considered themselves knowledgeable or skilled could still encounter forces beyond anticipation. Even routine excursions, which normally proceeded without incident, could produce results that confounded expectation. In the Alaska Triangle, where mountains, rivers and bays intersect with climate and human activity, ordinary understanding proved insufficient to guarantee safety, leaving room for the unexplained to dominate the narrative. To those observing from both sides, investigators and locals, the woman's drowning became emblematic of the persistent uncertainty within the Alaska Triangle. Unlike aviation accidents or missing climbers, this event occurred within a familiar and ostensibly controlled environment, demonstrating that mystery could emerge in even the most mundane settings. The absence of a clear cause reinforced a sense of unease, emphasizing that some incidents resist resolution, existing instead as reminders of human vulnerability to circumstances that defy explanation. Beneath the still surface of Resurrection Bay, the questions surrounding her death continue to linger, untangled and unresolved, refusing to fade from memory or understanding. The unidentified man along the Glen Highway. Along a stretch of the Glen Highway where traffic often flows without pause, a lone figure was found lying motionless, drawing immediate attention from those passing by. The discovery occurred in a section flanked by dense spruce and birch, a corridor that, while regularly travelled, still carried a sense of isolation due to its abrupt transitions between stretches of wilderness and small settlements. The man's presence was unexpected, incongruous against the rhythm of daily commutes and the predictable patterns of highway life. Local authorities would later acknowledge that incidents like this, though rare, evoke a peculiar tension in the area, one that resonates with the long-held reputation of the Alaska Triangle for producing events that resist straightforward explanation. The body's position was recorded with scrutiny, authorities noting how the surrounding roadside offered no obvious clues to what had led to the man's presence there. His posture suggested he'd come to rest, yet there was no vehicle nearby, no sign of a struggle, and no indication of an accident. Personal effects lay scattered but orderly, and nothing appeared damaged or out of place. Such details contrasted sharply with the uncertainty of his identity, creating a silent puzzle that demanded careful documentation. Photographs were taken, measurements recorded, and every detail noted, yet the scene offered more questions than answers. The response teams moved methodically, documenting every detail while attempting to reconstruct the hours leading to his discovery, aware that each observation might prove crucial. Officers examined the surrounding terrain, searching for signs of passage, disturbances in the snow or dirt, and any tracks that might reveal the man's route. Witnesses who had driven the highway that morning were interviewed, yet no one reported seeing him prior to the discovery. Even the most routine elements of the investigation were framed by uncertainty, as if the corridor itself had absorbed the explanation before anyone could reach it. Fingerprints, dental records, and cross-checks against missing persons databases were employed, yet each avenue returned only uncertainty, deepening the sense of unresolved mystery. Despite the full scope of forensic procedures available to investigators, the man remained nameless. Local medical examiners noted that there were no immediate signs of trauma or struggle, no injuries consistent with a vehicle collision, and no indication of foul play. The lack of identifying markers meant that every routine procedure produced dead ends, leaving the investigation tethered to the fundamental enigma. Who was he, and why was he there? Efforts were made to reconstruct the man's movements before the discovery, examining cell tower records, vehicle traffic logs, and potential sightings along the highway corridor. While there were no confirmed witnesses, subtle clues such as discarded receipts and slight disturbances near pullouts were noted as possible indicators of prior stops. Analysts considered the timing of sunrise, traffic density, and even the routine schedules of nearby businesses to establish a window of opportunity for when the man might have appeared on the road. Each detail, though minor, added depth to the investigation, reinforcing the tension between what could be deduced and the complete absence of definitive answers. Residents familiar with the highway recalled past reports of unexplained deaths and disappearances along its isolated stretches, reinforcing the eerie pattern that has long shadowed the area. Stories of transient hikers, lost travellers, and even motorists found in circumstances that defied explanation added context to the scene. While some accounts were anecdotal, the accumulation of reports lent the highway a subtle but persistent reputation for harbouring incidents where ordinary travel intersected with the inexplicable. For locals, the presence of the unidentified man was unsettling precisely because it occurred in a space they considered routine and familiar. Even mundane details, such as the condition of clothing and personal effects, were examined closely, revealing subtle inconsistencies that offered no clear explanation. The man's coat, gloves and boots appeared suitable for the weather and terrain, yet no other items, such as a backpack, identification, or personal tools, were present. Medical examiners considered possible disorientation, sudden medical event, or voluntary concealment, but none of these possibilities could be confirmed. Each anomaly, though minor in isolation, contributed to an overarching sense of mystery that seemed to defy ordinary understanding. Those who encountered the scene, from commuters to investigators, found themselves grappling with unease, recognizing that the ordinary routine of the highway had been interrupted by the inexplicable. Drivers recounted the shock of encountering authorities clustered around the figure, while officers and medical personnel described a silent tension that lingered beyond the procedural aspects of their work. The human response, a mixture of confusion, concern, and suspicion, became an integral part of the narrative, demonstrating how even the simplest landscape can produce profound psychological effects when the outcome is unknowable. The incident underscored how the Alaska Triangle's enigmatic reach extends even into corridors traveled daily, where familiarity offers no protection against its mysteries. The highway, though mapped, maintained, and frequented by locals and travelers alike, had become the setting for an event that resisted explanation. Unlike remote wilderness disappearances, this occurrence unfolded in a space that many assumed to be safe, intensifying the disquiet. It illustrated that the Triangle's reputation for the unexplained was not limited to aircraft, hikers, or waterborne accidents. Even a stretch of asphalt could host a mystery that confounded understanding. The man's identity remained a blank page, leaving the Glen Highway forever marked by a question that refused to be answered. The remains on the Talkeetna Spur. The skeletal remains were first spotted along a rarely travelled section of the Talkeetna Spur, partially obscured by underbrush yet impossible to overlook once noticed. The discovery occurred in a stretch that had been used historically by miners and loggers, a corridor of semi-wilderness that, while occasionally traversed, retained an air of isolation. Local authorities were alerted quickly, and the immediate attention of forensic teams underscored the unusual nature of the find. The Talkeetna Spur, though mapped and documented, had long been associated with disappearances, and the appearance of human remains added a new layer of intrigue to its reputation. Workers on routine maintenance immediately alerted authorities, who approached the scene with caution, aware that even a single discovery could unravel a complex and unresolved story. The initial survey focused on securing the area and documenting every observable detail before any disturbance occurred. Officials noted how the remains were positioned relative to the road and the surrounding terrain, aware that even minor discrepancies could be crucial to understanding what had transpired. Although the site was semi-accessible, the sense of remoteness persisted, and every procedure was conducted with deliberate care. Forensic teams documented the remains carefully, noting the preservation of certain bones and the absence of clothing or personal belongings that might have aided identification. Teeth and skull structure were examined for distinguishing features, and skeletal measurements were taken to estimate height, build, and age. The lack of personal items, combined with the remains' partial exposure, suggested that whatever had brought the individual to this location did not include the usual trappings of modern travel. These details heightened the mystery, as investigators were left to reconcile the presence of a body with the absence of context. Detailed examinations were conducted to determine the approximate time of death, potential movement patterns before the body came to rest, and any environmental factors that might explain anomalies. Analysts considered the proximity of trails, minor roads, and historical pathways, assessing whether the individual might have travelled from another location or if the remains had been moved post-mortem. Observations of soil compaction, minor scuffing, and nearby debris were meticulously recorded, each detail contributing to an increasingly complex investigative puzzle that offered little in the way of concrete answers. Subtle traces were analysed to determine how the individual had arrived at the spur, including worn tracks, tyre impressions, and the presence of small personal items near the remains. Even minor disturbances in the surrounding brush were carefully catalogued, as they could suggest temporary stops or movement through the area. Investigators reviewed maps of nearby logging roads, historical trails, and minor access points to assess whether the person had been travelling on foot or had been transported from elsewhere. Each small observation, though inconclusive on its own, contributed to a growing understanding of the site's complexity, revealing how ordinary details could transform into critical threads in an unresolved narrative. Dental records, skeletal markers, and local missing persons reports were all meticulously cross-referenced, yet the remains resisted identification, leaving investigators with only fragments of an incomplete life. Efforts to match records from nearby towns, as well as those spanning the larger Anchorage and Talkeetna regions, yielded no viable leads. Every potential connection that could bring clarity instead reinforced uncertainty. The absence of any identifying information intensified the sense of anomaly, demonstrating how the Talkeetna Spur could host a death both real and enigmatic. Tracking the individual's potential movements before discovery involved reviewing the spur's historical usage and the patterns of local traffic and travel. Though the location was not frequently visited, it was known as a route occasionally used by off-road vehicles, hikers, and hunters. Analysts considered the timing of past activities, seasonal patterns, and any reports of people in the area, but no verifiable sightings could establish a timeline. Each new detail, while factual and grounded, only magnified the difficulty of establishing what had brought the person to that particular stretch of road. The Talkeetna Spur, a route historically traversed by miners, loggers, and travellers, has long been associated with disappearances and unexplained deaths, adding a layer of regional significance to the case. Past incidents along similar stretches had produced findings that were either partially documented or never fully resolved, creating a tapestry of unresolved events that lingered in the local consciousness. For those familiar with the area, the presence of remains on the spur was both unsettling and oddly consistent with the location's reputation as a corridor where ordinary activity intersects with the inexplicable. Even small details, particular angle of a limb, a missing item typically carried by travellers, or irregular wear on boots, presented questions that standard explanations could not resolve. Forensic analysts debated whether these anomalies could be the result of environmental factors, predation, or human intervention, yet none of these possibilities could be conclusively verified. Every seemingly minor inconsistency fed into the overarching narrative of uncertainty, creating a sense that the death was not merely unfortunate but shrouded in the inexplicable tendencies associated with the Alaska Triangle. The discovery left an imprint on the local community, evoking unease among residents and officials who recognized the spur as a place where normal routines could abruptly give way to enigma. Conversations in nearby towns reflected both sympathy for the unknown individual and lingering speculation about how such a death could remain so opaque. The incident reinforced a broader awareness that even semi-accessible roads in the Alaska Triangle could serve as repositories for human stories that resisted closure. The identity of the remains remained a silent riddle, the Talkeetna Spur holding its story in quiet defiance of every attempt to understand it. The camper who left a full camp behind. The campsite appeared untouched, as if the camper had simply stepped away for a moment and never returned, leaving every item precisely where it belonged. The small clearing was neatly arranged, with a tent pitched carefully at one edge, a compact stove still on its stand, and a sleeping bag rolled with the meticulous care of someone accustomed to wilderness expeditions. At first glance, it seemed like a scene frozen in time, yet the absence of the person who had occupied it was immediately unnerving. It was in this ordinary setting that the Alaskan Triangle once again revealed its capacity for the inexplicable, transforming the mundane act of camping into a puzzle that confounded those called to investigate. Rangers and investigators who arrived were struck by the absence of disturbance, a scene that seemed more staged than natural. They moved slowly through the campsite, careful not to alter the arrangement, noting how the fire pit contained only a few half-burned logs and the ground around the tent remained undisturbed. Tools and cooking utensils were aligned as though awaiting use, yet there was no one to wield them. The meticulous order deepened the mystery. Nothing suggested panic, struggle, or hurried departure, leaving only questions about how a person could vanish without leaving a trace in such a contained area. A kettle of water still sat on the stove, meals remained uneaten, and personal belongings were arranged with care, offering no immediate explanation for the sudden disappearance. A backpack lay zipped and untouched, a journal lay open on the ground as if paused mid-entry, and a pair of boots were placed neatly outside the tent entrance. Small items that usually scatter with normal campsite activity were all in place, a fact that puzzled investigators who understood that even experienced campers rarely left such a precise arrangement. The scene was so deliberate in its stillness that it suggested intentional absence, though no signs of packing, notes or messages hinted at voluntary departure. A hiker passing nearby days earlier recalled seeing the camper methodically setting up the site, yet no one else reported any unusual activity before or after that moment. This witness described a person who appeared competent, familiar with backcountry routines, and entirely self-sufficient. There had been no alarm, no struggle, and no indication that the camper sensed danger or anticipated leaving abruptly. Yet when the area was revisited later, the individual had vanished without leaving any clues beyond the meticulously arranged camp. The witness account only deepened the mystery, providing a brief, tangible connection to a person who seemed otherwise erased from the landscape. Specialists catalogued the area for footprints, tire marks, and any indication of voluntary or forced departure, only to find patterns that contradicted ordinary human behaviour. No trails led away from the clearing, and the surrounding underbrush remained undisturbed, as though the camper had simply ceased to exist within the perimeter. Attempts to use tracking dogs were inconclusive, with the animals unable to pick up a reliable scent beyond the campsite. Even the most subtle disturbances, scuff marks, broken twigs, displaced gravel, appeared absent, leaving investigators to confront a disappearance that resisted conventional explanation and defied the very techniques designed to illuminate it. The surrounding region had been the site of multiple vanishings over decades, lending a weight of historical unease to an incident that, on its own, defied easy comprehension. Accounts of hikers, hunters, and small aircraft passengers disappearing in similarly routine circumstances formed an unsettling pattern, though each case retained unique anomalies. The Alaskan Triangle, loosely defined by its intersecting mountains, rivers, and interior expanses, had long been associated with disappearances that eluded rational explanation. Within this context, the camper's absence added a new layer to a regional history that already blurred the lines between coincidence, misfortune, and inexplicable phenomena. Even small details, the unrolled sleeping bag, the fire pit still warm, and a journal lying open but unread, hinted at a presence that vanished without leaving conventional traces. Investigators noted how these elements contradicted normal camping behaviour, where movement, wind, or wildlife typically disturb such objects. The journal pages showed handwriting paused mid-thought, yet no signs indicated theft or removal. This preservation of personal space, combined with the absence of footprints leading away, created a paradox. Everything suggested habitation, yet the occupant had left no discernible trail to mark an exit. Despite aerial surveys, tracking dogs, and interviews with nearby campers, the trail went cold almost immediately, leaving the disappearance as inscrutable as the landscape itself. Helicopters combed accessible areas, yet the terrain offered few vantage points, and the dense conifers and uneven topography limited visibility. Authorities reached out to nearby lodges and park stations, requesting sightings or contact that might explain the camper's sudden absence, yet no additional information surfaced. Each investigative effort returned the same unyielding result. The person had vanished as though removed by an unseen hand, leaving behind a campsite that defied all conventional logic. Locals and officials alike spoke of a lingering tension, a quiet acknowledgement that the Alaska Triangle could claim someone without warning, even when every precaution was taken. Conversations in ranger stations, whispered over radios or across kitchen tables in nearby communities, carried the same uneasy refrain. Here was yet another case to be filed under the inexplicable. The camper's disappearance reinforced a sense of vulnerability, reminding both seasoned backcountry travellers and authorities that ordinary routines could be interrupted by forces or circumstances beyond understanding. The camper's absence left a perfectly preserved camp as the only testament to a life interrupted, a silent tableau that refused to offer answers. The canoeist lost on the Susitna. The canoe cut a steady line across the Susitna River, a solitary figure moving with practiced ease before vanishing into the immensity of Alaska's waterways. For decades, this river had threaded through the Alaska Triangle, drawing adventurers, hunters, and travellers into its shifting currents, yet leaving behind an unsettling number of stories that ended without explanation. On that late summer afternoon, one canoeist embarked on a journey that would vanish from recorded memory, leaving only fragments of preparation and fleeting eyewitness accounts to suggest that anyone had been there at all. The routine nature of the trip, paired with the individual's experience on rivers of similar breadth, only heightened the mystery of what would transpire in those hours. Notes left at a riverside put-in indicated a precise route and estimated timeline, yet no one would ever see the planned checkpoints reached. The canoeist had clearly marked the points where short rest stops would occur and even left a small cache of supplies intended for overnight use. Locals who occasionally camped near the river recalled seeing the canoeist's small tent set up neatly, lines taut and gear stowed as though ready for a prolonged but ordinary trip. Despite this, each item remained untouched long after the disappearance, emphasizing a sudden and complete vanishing that ignored all the meticulous preparations made in anticipation of the journey. Fishermen on the opposite bank remembered spotting the canoeist mid-afternoon, paddling steadily with nothing appearing amiss, until the vessel seemed to dissolve into the river's shifting currents. The sun glinted off the water, reflecting a canoe that had been moving normally, neither hesitating nor showing signs of struggle, before it simply disappeared as though the river had swallowed it whole. Their accounts, taken later by investigators, emphasized the strangeness of the absence. No capsizing, no sudden turn, no movement indicating a conscious departure from the expected path. The eyewitnesses' memories remained the closest anyone could get to understanding the final moments of the canoeist's journey. Authorities launched a coordinated response, combing miles of shoreline and scanning the turbulent waters, only to find that the river had swallowed all traces of a person who had been visible moments before. Boats patrolled both sides of the Susitna, while aerial surveys attempted to trace any glint of the canoe or movement of the riverbank where footprints might have led. Despite meticulous coverage of the expected route, there was no evidence of struggle, no sign of a capsized craft, and no discarded gear to mark a point of distress. The thoroughness of the effort only deepened the mystery, highlighting how a single human presence could seemingly vanish without leaving even the smallest trace. A single paddle bobbed briefly near the riverbank, drifting slowly downstream, but the canoe and its occupant left no imprint or sign of struggle anywhere along the expected route. Investigators retrieved the paddle and examined it carefully, noting that it bore no unusual marks or damage that might suggest a violent accident. The absence of other artifacts contradicted everything known about river travel, where a sudden accident typically left some remnant behind, whether equipment or personal items. This lone piece, floating unanchored and inconclusive, became a symbol of the unsolvable nature of the disappearance. Experts noted the Susitna's unpredictable currents, hidden eddies and sudden shallow drop-offs, all of which could explain accidents, yet none could account for the absolute absence of a body or craft. The river's behaviour had been documented extensively in guidebooks and safety reports, emphasising points where an inexperienced paddler might capsize or be carried downstream. Yet the canoeist had extensive experience, and nothing about the documented hazards aligned with a disappearance so complete that even a lifeless canoe failed to appear. The mismatch between environmental explanation and reality deepened the sense of incomprehensibility surrounding the incident. The Susitna had long been threaded with disappearances, both canoeists and floaters alike, and yet the pattern remained as enigmatic as the river itself, resisting every attempt at explanation. Historical records, often sparse, hinted at other travellers who had set out along similar stretches only to never arrive at their destinations. In some cases, bodies were recovered downstream, but in others, as with this canoeist, the river left no trace, leaving investigators to wonder whether an entirely different force was at work, one that defied both logic and known natural phenomena. Each case seemed to add to a growing lore that made the Susitna one of the Alaska Triangle's most inscrutable corridors. Searchers considered every plausible scenario, from capsizing to voluntary disappearance, but each possibility collided with the stubborn fact that no trace existed to support it. An intentional vanishing seemed improbable given the careful preparations and the canoeist's known character. An accident involving the river's hazards would have left some evidence, whether scattered supplies, a flipped canoe, or a downstream body. Even the most unlikely theories were weighed against the overwhelming absence of confirmation, forcing those involved to confront the possibility that the canoeist had simply ceased to exist in a manner beyond conventional understanding. Locals spoke of the river in hushed tones, recognizing that the Susitna could claim those who navigated it with experience and skill, leaving behind only questions that would never be answered. Among frequent travellers, the incident became a cautionary tale, one that reminded people that no amount of preparation could guarantee safety in a landscape that had proven itself capricious and enigmatic. The story of the vanished canoeist persisted in conversations, newspapers, and official files, carrying a weight that exceeded any single factual detail and entering a collective memory of the river as a place where disappearances could occur without warning or trace. The river had taken its solitary traveller without warning, leaving behind a riddle that even time seemed reluctant to dissolve. The pilot missing over Malaspina Glacier. The small aircraft lifted into the pale morning sky, its destination set toward the vast frozen expanse of the Malaspina Glacier, where the pilot's intended course would soon vanish from all records. The flight, seemingly routine, departed under calm conditions that belied the treacherous terrain below, as the pilot relied on a carefully plotted navigation plan meant to carry him across one of Alaska's most formidable glacial expanses. Despite the apparent normality of the morning, the Malaspina Glacier had long been a corridor where ordinary flights could transform into perplexing disappearances, and this journey would soon join that list of unresolved mysteries. The aircraft itself had been well maintained, a reliable model favoured by local pilots for decades, yet mechanical reliability alone could not guard against the unpredictable challenges of this remote icy wilderness. On board, the pilot followed a routine flight plan that seemed ordinary to anyone reviewing the logs later, yet every detail of the journey would be scrutinised after the disappearance. He maintained a steady course, monitoring instruments and making occasional adjustments as the icy landscape spread beneath the wings. Aviation records confirm that the pilot was experienced with regional flights, familiar with glacial crossings, and meticulous about pre-flight preparations, but even seasoned skill could not guarantee safety in such a volatile environment. Witnesses who observed the takeoff recalled his calm demeanour and precise control, a stark contrast to the ominous silence that would descend after he passed beyond the last radio range. To those tracking the departure, the flight appeared entirely standard, a momentary path through the vast Alaska Triangle that would never reach its intended conclusion. The final radio transmission reached the nearest station with clarity, yet within it lingered an unusual hesitation that would haunt investigators and aviation experts alike. The pilot reported a slight adjustment in heading to avoid an area of uneven ice, his voice calm but brief, and then, abruptly, contact was lost. No distress signal followed, no indication of mechanical failure, only a silent break in communication that would leave searchers puzzled. Experts later noted that such hesitations were sometimes indicative of unexpected atmospheric turbulence or an unreported instrument anomaly, but nothing in the transmission revealed the ultimate fate of the aircraft. This singular communication, recorded on multiple frequencies, became a critical point of analysis for aviation investigators, yet its significance remained unresolved. From the moment the aircraft vanished, attempts to find it began, but each sweep over the glacier revealed only a surface of pristine ice, untouched and indifferent to the pilot's fate. Helicopters scanned vast stretches, while small reconnaissance aircraft tried to spot anything unusual amid the shimmering ice and scattered snowfields. Ground teams attempted to traverse the peripheries of the glacier, but even with satellite-assisted planning, the vastness of the area meant that crucial sections could easily remain unexamined. Yet even the most thorough searches turned up nothing definitive. No wreckage, no signal, and no trace of the pilot's journey beyond the last known coordinates. Each attempt seemed to underscore the enormity of the glacier and the limits of human detection against such a sprawling, frozen expanse. Under the surface of seemingly smooth ice, hidden crevasses and shifting snowfields transformed the glacier into a treacherous labyrinth, making even the most advanced search equipment nearly impotent. Glaciologists later emphasized how crevasse openings could appear suddenly, swallowing objects without a trace, while snow and ice could conceal even substantial debris for weeks or months. The dynamics of the glacier created a moving landscape that confounded aerial and ground searchers alike, ensuring that anything lost to its depths might remain hidden indefinitely. In some cases, internal glacier flows could even transport small fragments far from their point of entry, scattering evidence over miles of unbroken ice and complicating investigative efforts further. A fragment of aluminum discovered weeks later raised more questions than answers, yet official reports confirmed it could not definitively be linked to the missing flight. Investigators analysed the piece thoroughly, comparing serial numbers and structural markings, but the fragment's provenance remained uncertain. Though some speculated it could be part of the lost aircraft, there was no concrete evidence, and it only added to the mounting frustration surrounding the case. Such fragments, found in isolation, often became enigmatic markers, physical reminders of a disappearance that otherwise left no trail. Even forensic specialists acknowledged the difficulty of confirming an origin when environmental factors, including ice movement and extreme cold, could alter or erode identifying features. Experts analysing the flight trajectory suggested several plausible outcomes, from sudden mechanical failure to subtle navigational errors, though none could explain the absence of conclusive evidence. Some hypothesized a minor miscalculation in wind drift could have carried the plane off course, while others considered the possibility of an undetected engine malfunction. The technical analyses were meticulous and grounded in verified principles, but each theory carried its uncertainties, highlighting the challenge of reconstructing a path that had vanished entirely into the frozen landscape. Investigators also examined historical data on weather patterns over Malaspina Glacier, noting that sudden microbursts of wind or unexpected snow squalls could appear without warning, producing conditions capable of confounding even the most experienced pilot. Similar disappearances over Alaska's glaciers hinted at a grim pattern, but every case remained distinct, underscoring the enduring enigma of aviation in the Alaska Triangle. From untraceable bushplane flights to missing private aircraft, the region had accumulated a history of disappearances that defied explanation despite meticulous investigation. Patterns could be suggested, but no definitive causality could be established, leaving the Malaspina incident to stand as a singularly baffling example, its mystery compounded by both the terrain's vastness and the absence of tangible evidence. Analysts have since documented multiple flights in the area that deviated from planned routes only to vanish without a trace, reinforcing the notion that the glacier operates as both a natural highway and an unpredictable trap. Swallowed by a frozen void, the aircraft and its pilot disappeared, taking with them sound and certainty, leaving only a trail of unanswered questions that continue to defy explanation. The frozen expanse of the Malaspina Glacier had claimed what few traces of human passage had existed, and decades later, no wreckage or definitive clues have emerged to illuminate the events of that day. While theories abound, the disappearance remains a stark reminder that in Alaska's vast triangle of ice and shadow, even the most experienced aviators can vanish entirely, leaving only the relentless puzzle of what truly transpired. No trace of the plane or its pilot has ever emerged, leaving the Malaspina Glacier to guard its secret in silence, indifferent to every question humanity dares to ask. The hunter whose trail ended at a cliff. The hunter had set out into Alaska's remote wilderness with the confidence of a man intimately familiar with rugged terrain, drawn by the quiet promise of the hunt and the vast, unbroken landscape. His route carried him over moss-draped ridges, through dense stands of spruce and fir, and across rocky outcrops where the wind bit through clothing and the sun glinted off frost-coated boulders. For miles, his footprints marked a deliberate path, evidence of a practiced step across uneven ground, careful navigation, and awareness of every hazard the wilderness could present. Yet somewhere along a cliff, the trail ended abruptly. There were no marks of a fall, no disturbed rock, no vegetation bent or broken beneath the edge, and no trace of the hunter himself. Searchers who followed the path to the cliff could only confront the unsettling impossibility. The man's prints vanished, leaving the landscape undisturbed, as if he'd stepped out of existence. Multiple search parties returned to the site over days and weeks, combing every slope, gully and crevice with painstaking care. Helicopters scanned the ridges and valleys from above, while ground teams probed fissures, talus fields, and any area that might conceal a hidden body. Each effort concluded in the same haunting way: empty. Clothing, hunting gear, and personal effects were nowhere to be found. Even the snow and moss underfoot, which might have preserved faint traces, remained unbroken beyond the final visible footprints. It was as though the wilderness itself had swallowed the hunter, leaving only the abrupt end of his trail as a mute testament to what had occurred. The region is notoriously harsh and unforgiving. Alaska's wilderness stretches across thousands of square miles of uninhabited land, carved by glaciers and dotted with jagged mountains and dense forests. Weather can change in an instant. Snow, wind and ice can erase evidence almost as quickly as it appears. Fallen logs, underbrush and rocky scree may conceal a body or scatter equipment beyond recognition. Animals may move or destroy items, leaving no trace of human presence. Yet in this case, the cliff's face was exposed and rocky, a place where any fall should have left clear evidence: broken branches, a displaced boulder, or the hunter's gear strewn across the slope. Instead, nothing was found, not even a single indication of a struggle. Over time, investigators and those familiar with the case proposed several theories. One suggested the hunter had fallen into a hidden fissure or undercut ledge, carried out of sight by loose rock or scree. Another considered the possibility of snow or debris concealing evidence that would have otherwise been visible. A different hypothesis proposed that the hunter had misjudged the cliff's edge, slipping into a narrow crack or ravine where his body became trapped in a way that left no observable trace. While each theory seemed plausible, none could be confirmed, and the complete absence of evidence rendered every explanation speculative. The psychological impact on those who participated in the searches cannot be overstated. Experienced hunters, guides and trackers who combed the cliffside spoke of the disquieting sense that the wilderness had claimed the man with deliberate silence. There was no body to recover, no clues to reconstruct a timeline, and no physical evidence to suggest what had truly happened. The abrupt ending of the footprints created an almost tangible tension, a reminder that even those skilled in navigation and survival could disappear entirely in the Alaskan backcountry. It was a stark demonstration of how the landscape could confound human understanding, swallowing individuals in ways that defied reason. The disappearance contributed to the chilling reputation of the Alaska Triangle, a region defined by the frequency of unexplained vanishings. While some cases can be attributed to accidents, exposure, or misadventure, others share the same eerie qualities seen here. Individuals vanish while performing familiar tasks, leaving no signs of trauma or struggle, and no recoverable evidence. The hunter's case, in particular, stands out because of the completeness of the vanishing. The trail ended, and there was no continuation, no fragments of a body, and no gear to suggest an accident or animal interference. For those who study the region's mysteries, the case remains emblematic of the Triangle's capacity to absorb people entirely, leaving only questions. The cliff itself remains unchanged over the years. Winds sweep across the ridges carrying the scent of pine and stone, and snow gathers along the jagged edges, yet the place retains an echo of absence. Locals, adventurers and trackers who visit speak of the site in hushed tones, aware that the wilderness can take without warning and leave behind only silence. Even decades later, those who retrace the steps leading to the cliff find the terrain as daunting as it was on the day the hunter vanished, and the sense of the unknown continues to haunt all who approach. Through extensive searches and examinations of the area, no new evidence has emerged. Histories, records, and oral accounts preserve only the facts that are known. The hunter left home for the wilderness, His footprints led to a cliff, and the trail abruptly stopped. Beyond that point, the land offers no explanation, no narrative, no closure. The disappearance stands as a reminder of the perilous and enigmatic nature of Alaska's backcountry, where even the most experienced can vanish entirely, leaving behind nothing but questions that refuse to be answered. The fate of the hunter remains entirely unknown, his disappearance etched into the cliffs and forests that claimed him, leaving only the wilderness itself to hold the secret. The woman missing at Nick River Bridge. A thin layer of ice coated the Nick River Bridge, and the stillness of the frigid night magnified every creak of metal and gust of wind, as if the landscape itself were holding its breath. The river below reflected a muted moonlight, its surface broken only by the occasional swirl of cold currents. It was here, along this isolated stretch of road connecting rural communities, that a vehicle was discovered in circumstances that would baffle investigators and draw the attention of those who track the strange disappearances of the Alaska Triangle. Though the bridge was crossed daily by locals, the setting that night seemed transformed by a peculiar silence, one that seemed to magnify the absence of a single figure who should have been present. The vehicle sat abandoned on the span, engine humming faintly, its headlights casting long, ghostly reflections across the dark water below. Doors were closed, and no immediate signs indicated a struggle, yet the warmth inside suggested the driver had left only moments before. Inside, personal items remained scattered, including a purse and a jacket, as if she had intended to return. The faint hum of the engine became a subtle reminder of the ordinary, interrupted by the extraordinary, a familiar object in a familiar place, yet one that marked the threshold of the inexplicable. Rescuers fanned out across the snow-dusted roadway and adjacent embankments, eyes scanning for footprints, tyre tracks, or any sign of where the driver might have gone. Their search extended into the nearby banks, along the river's edge, and into the darkened woods flanking the bridge. Even with flashlights and careful observation, the ground yielded nothing. No sign of movement away from the car, no dropped items that might hint at directional distress. Each sweep ended in frustration, leaving behind only the cold wind and the silent river as witnesses to a vanishing that did not explain. Cold seeped into every crevice of the bridge, and the river's current churned silently beneath, carrying with it the constant reminder that this remote terrain could hide nearly anything. The night pressed in with oppressive quiet, amplifying the smallest sound, the distant howl of a dog, the snap of ice underfoot, the whisper of wind over metal. Investigators noted that the surrounding environment, while unremarkable to locals during the day, could become treacherous and disorienting at night. Hidden drops, snow-covered ice, and thick underbrush rendered the area capable of concealing even the most obvious clues. The Nick River Bridge itself is a steel and concrete structure spanning nearly 400 feet, with guardrails coated in frost and wooden planks that creak under the slightest weight, a combination that could unsettle even the most confident traveller. Below, the river swells unpredictably in winter, fed by glacial runoff that churns the water into icy eddies, while occasional pockets of thin ice cling to the banks, offering deceptive footing. Along the roadside, drifted snow and scattered debris from winter storms created natural barriers that would complicate any attempt to leave the vehicle unnoticed, yet investigators found none of these obstacles marked or disturbed, deepening the mystery of a vanishing that appeared to defy the laws of the surrounding landscape. Despite hours of methodical searching, no prints led away from the car, no discarded belongings hinted at a struggle, and the bridge seemed to have swallowed the woman whole. Each path, each bank, each shadowed copse of trees yielded nothing, deepening the sense of unease. The uniform emptiness created a rare and eerie pattern of disappearance, evidence of presence without any indication of movement beyond the immediate scene. Even seasoned investigators admitted that the vanishing defied conventional explanation, leaving them to confront the unsettling possibility that the individual had simply ceased to exist in any observable way. Nearby residents later described the area as deceptively quiet, a thoroughfare often crossed without incident, yet framed by dark woods and icy banks that could conceal a misstep or sudden accident. Though traffic occasionally passed the bridge, few were aware of the precise conditions that night. Local law mentioned prior minor incidents, vehicles sliding on ice, hikers lost in the surrounding woods, and sudden weather changes, all of which painted the setting as benign by day but subtly menacing after dusk. These contextual details did little to resolve the disappearance, yet they underscored the difficulty of navigating even a seemingly ordinary location when the environment itself could obscure the smallest evidence. It was considered that she might have fallen into the river, wandered into the surrounding woods, or experienced a medical emergency, yet each scenario failed to account for the absence of physical traces. A fall into the fast-moving waters might have swept away a body, yet the river was not known to carry objects so completely without leaving any downstream trace. A flight into the woods might have left tracks in the snow or disturbed vegetation, yet no signs were found. Even a medical misadventure would likely have resulted in the dropping of personal items or other indicators. Every plausible explanation faltered against the blankness of the evidence, leaving only the disquieting certainty that the truth remained beyond reach. The abandoned car, still warm to the touch and utterly unclaimed, became a haunting emblem of uncertainty, a silent question that would linger over the Nick River long after the night had passed. For those who combed the scene, the bridge transformed into more than a crossing point. It became a monument to absence, a fixed location where normal expectations were upended by the inexplicable. Even now, in retrospect, the memory of the vehicle and its unaccounted-for driver serves as a chilling reminder that in Alaska's remote regions, everyday landscapes can host events that defy understanding, where a brief presence can end as mysteriously as it begins. Across the expanse of river, ice, and darkened woodland, the woman's fate remains a question without answer, a gap in the ordinary fabric of the environment that no search, no reasoning, and no amount of observation has ever resolved. The unclaimed bones of the Copper River Valley. The Copper River Valley stretched in silent grandeur, its glaciers feeding rivers that carved through dense spruce and birch, and it was here, amid shifting snow and jagged rock, that erosion would eventually reveal what had long been hidden. Jagged cliffs and steep riverbanks created natural boundaries that few traversed, and the valley's remote isolation lent an air of permanence to the land's quiet mysteries. When the first fragments emerged from the soil, they were not dramatic or immediately alarming. Instead, they appeared as subtle anomalies against a landscape shaped by centuries of ice and water. Yet for those who discovered them, the pale surfaces of the bones hinted at a story both ancient and unresolved, a human presence that had silently awaited exposure. Pieces of skeletal remains lay partially exposed on a sloped bank, their surfaces bleached by sun and wind, accompanied by tattered scraps of fabric that clung to soil and stone as if reluctant to leave. Investigators noted that the skeletal remains were scattered over a small area, some partially embedded in compacted earth, others resting atop glacial silt. No personal effects beyond the fabric were present, and there were no markers to suggest burial or intentional placement. The initial observer, a local hunter following game trails, recalled an unsettling quiet, the kind of silence that amplifies the awareness of a human absence. Each fragment seemed to float in isolation, a reminder that the valley had preserved secrets in plain sight for years, perhaps decades. Authorities arrived with cameras, measuring tapes, and protective gloves, documenting the location meticulously before any movement was attempted. They photographed each fragment from multiple angles, mapped its position relative to nearby river bends and rocks, and collected samples in carefully labelled containers for laboratory examination. Forensic specialists emphasised that even slight displacement could erase valuable information, and the cold, damp soil added urgency to the task. Every action was deliberate, measured, and methodical, yet despite these precautions, the investigators quickly realised that the bones alone might tell only a fragment of the story, leaving the broader mystery frustratingly intact. Wind, rain, and seasonal floods had reshaped the surrounding terrain, while scavenging animals had disturbed smaller debris, scattering it over a wide area and leaving little trace of origin. The nearby river, swollen by glacial runoff, carved channels into the soil and deposited silt across the banks, altering the landscape in ways that complicated the reconstruction of past events. Snowfall, even in minor amounts, further concealed evidence, and the thick spruce forests limited visibility from above. Investigators noted that this combination of natural forces created a scene where a body could be partially revealed or concealed repeatedly, making it nearly impossible to determine when or how the remains first appeared above the surface. Forensic experts examined the bones meticulously, measuring size, noting age markers, and studying wear and development, yet despite advanced techniques, they could not link the fragments to any known missing person or historical record. Dental identification proved impossible due to the absence of teeth or restorative work, and radiocarbon estimates suggested a timeline too broad to narrow to specific incidents. Even DNA sampling was complicated by environmental contamination, soil acidity, and prolonged exposure to elements. Each test returned only confirmation of human origin, leaving the investigators with certainty about what they were looking at, but none about to whom it had once belonged. Historical context offered few clues. The valley has long been traversed by indigenous communities, miners during the early 20th century, and transient hunters, all of whom left faint imprints on the land, yet rarely permanent markers. Temporary campsites, small cabins, and hunting traps had been documented in the region, yet none corresponded with the location of the remains. The presence of human activity was unquestionable, but the bones seemed disconnected from any known trail, settlement, or historical record, as though they belonged to someone entirely unaccounted for in the valley's recorded history. Using every available method, investigators attempted to reconstruct events, including aerial surveys, topographical mapping, and environmental analysis of erosion patterns. They considered the possibility that the remains had shifted over time, moved by flooding or landslides, yet even accounting for natural displacement, the absence of any other human traces remained confounding. The scattered nature of the fragments suggested a passage of time or environmental interference rather than deliberate placement, but the sheer lack of contextual clues rendered every hypothesis tentative. Each day spent analysing the scene reinforced the realisation that the valley itself could obscure as much as it revealed. The psychological toll on those involved in the investigation was subtle yet palpable. Experienced forensic specialists, accustomed to reconstructing scenes with partial evidence, described a sense of unease when confronted with the absence of identifying markers or clues. Locals who visited the site reported the same impression, an awareness of human presence accompanied by the impossibility of understanding how or why the bones came to rest where they did. The combination of isolation, unpredictable terrain, and total anonymity of the remains created a lingering tension, a quiet reminder that the valley could harbour secrets indefinitely, impervious to human curiosity. In the broader context of the Alaskan Triangle, the discovery fits a disturbing pattern of unexplained human vanishings and mysterious findings. While some incidents involve immediate disappearances, others, like these unclaimed bones, suggest long-term concealment by environment, time, or circumstance. The valley's remoteness and unpredictable forces make it a repository for unresolved events, where even the most careful documentation cannot guarantee resolution. Each unclaimed fragment reinforces the enduring enigma of the region, leaving questions about identity, origin, and circumstance that persist beyond observation or investigation. Silent testimony lingers in the Copper River Valley, held in pale fragments, a mystery that endures long after the footprints and lives of those it sheltered have vanished. The mountaineer whose rope was still anchored. Jagged spires of rock rose sharply above the ice fields, their faces streaked with frost, and somewhere along one sheer cliff, a climber vanished without a trace, leaving the mountain itself as the silent witness. The route had long been recognised by mountaineers for its technical difficulty, with narrow ledges, exposed ridges, and ice-laden overhangs demanding constant attention. Those familiar with the peak noted that even minor miscalculations could become catastrophic, yet the disappearance remained unusual in its abruptness. No storm, no avalanche, and no recent seismic activity had been recorded at the time, leaving only the mountain and its unforgiving terrain as the stage for the unexplained event. A single rope remained taut, secured to a weathered anchor bolt drilled decades earlier, while a carabiner and worn harness hung motionless, signalling preparation interrupted by something neither anticipated nor recorded. The equipment was intact and properly set, suggesting that the climber had checked the anchors and ensured stability before continuing upward. Snow clung to the rope and bolts, untouched, while ice crystals glistened in the sunlight, underscoring the stillness of the scene. Rescue teams could find no indication that the rope had been used improperly or tampered with. heightening the strangeness of a disappearance that seemed to defy normal circumstances. Analysis indicated the rope showed no sign of fraying, tension slippage, or wear beyond normal use, and the anchor bolt was firmly embedded in solid granite, evidence that the climber had followed standard safety protocols. Snow and ice clung lightly to the rope and harness, yet neither indicated recent movement or tampering, suggesting the disappearance occurred without any failure of equipment. Observers noted that the rope's tautness implied a load had been applied, yet no trace of a descent or fall was present, a contradiction that perplexed even experienced mountaineers. Nearby ice formations and crevices could have concealed a sudden accident, but the alignment of gear and absence of disturbed snow suggested that the climber's vanishing occurred in a manner that left no immediate physical clues behind. Rescuers edged cautiously across narrow ledges and icy overhangs, measuring distances, noting anchor positions, and scanning every slope below, mindful that a misstep could mirror the climber's own sudden disappearance. Each movement was calculated, the team aware that a single slip could trigger a fall, yet even with such precautions, the search revealed nothing. Observers looked down into shadowed crevices, over fractured rock faces, and along snowfields, but no footprints, dropped items, or traces of passage appeared. The mountain's silence persisted, its ridges and gullies concealing whatever had taken the climber from sight. High winds tore across the ridge, ice glimmered with deceptive slipperiness, and drifting clouds obscured depth perception, transforming a familiar climbing route into a treacherous maze capable of erasing every sign of passage. Temperature fluctuations had created thin layers of unstable ice on rock surfaces, and the sun's brief warmth caused small rockfalls that could displace evidence in minutes. These natural forces combined to make any reconstruction of events extraordinarily difficult, yet even in conditions that might have obscured small details, the climber's absence remained particularly puzzling. The rope, anchored and unmoved, offered a stark contrast to the void above and below it. The climb demanded advanced technical skill, precise belaying, anchor assessment, and constant attention to shifting conditions, highlighting that even competence and preparation offer no guarantee when the mountain asserts itself. Climbers who undertake such routes are trained to anticipate sudden ice shifts, evaluate rock stability, and respond immediately to hazards, all while maintaining focus over extended periods. That a mountaineer experienced enough to navigate these risks could vanish underlines the unsettling reality that the natural environment retains the power to override human expertise, leaving observers with questions that cannot be answered by skill alone. Despite careful examination, no footprints, dropped gear, or signs of struggle could be located, and the surrounding snow and rock yielded nothing to explain how a climber could vanish from a fully anchored line. Investigators and climbers alike considered the absence of any disturbance as evidence of something extraordinary or atypical. The snow beneath the rope remained undisturbed, and the rocks near the anchor showed no scrape marks or signs of sliding. The lack of physical traces amplified the mystery, giving rise to speculation even among professionals who normally rely on tangible evidence to reconstruct accidents. Experts examined the possibilities: an unseen crevasse, sudden slip, or momentary failure of equipment, yet the rope's secure placement and absence of other disturbances left each theory unconfirmed. Crevasses in nearby glaciers can open suddenly and remain hidden beneath thin ice, creating hazards that may go unnoticed until it is too late. Rockfall or minor avalanches could theoretically move a climber, but the intact anchors and undisturbed surroundings suggested that no major displacement had occurred. Weather changes were brief and minor, removing environmental factors as a conclusive explanation. Every potential scenario collided with the stubborn fact that the climber had disappeared without leaving any sign. The anchored rope remained a silent question, dangling above a cliff that had consumed its climber and left the mountain to hold its secret beyond reach or understanding. Those who returned to the site in subsequent weeks noted the same eerie stillness, as if the peak itself had accepted the disappearance and refused to release its story. For the mountaineering community, the incident became a cautionary tale, an example of how even meticulous preparation and skill cannot always contend with the unknowable forces of the Alaskan wilderness. The rope still sways in the wind, a solitary witness to a climber who vanished into the heights, leaving only questions and the mountain's silent verdict. The cabin where the fire explained nothing. Deep within a dense stand of spruce and hemlock, a small cabin rested on the edge of a frozen creek, its isolation accentuated by steep hills and snow-laden trails that few traversed. The structure, weathered and modest, had stood for decades, serving as a temporary shelter for hunters, trappers, and travelers seeking refuge from the vast Alaskan wilderness. When investigators arrived, the fire had already burned itself out, leaving blackened timber, curling smoke stains, and a silence that seemed to absorb the forest itself. This was the cabin where the fire explained nothing, a place where human presence had once existed but now offered only questions. Smoke stains and partially charred debris marked the scene, yet the immediate surroundings showed no footprints, snow disturbances, or tracks that could indicate who had been inside or when. The cabin's door hung slightly ajar, its hinges warped by heat, while interior walls and floorboards were scorched unevenly, suggesting a blaze that spread erratically, consuming some sections more thoroughly than others. Small fragments of glass and melted metal littered the interior, and scorched clothing or fabric remained pinned beneath warped beams. For those who arrived first, the absence of human traces amplified the mystery. Someone had been here, yet left no discernible imprint beyond the burned remains. The team approached cautiously, documenting every detail with photographs, measurements, and notes, aware that each observation could be vital in reconstructing events. Burn patterns on walls and floorboards were analysed to identify potential ignition points, and the scorched debris was examined for accelerants, electrical faults, or other possible sources. Each item was catalogued and photographed multiple times, but the scene resisted explanation. Despite methodical documentation, no definitive cause of the fire could be determined, leaving the investigative team both perplexed and uneasy. The surrounding terrain complicated every movement. Thick underbrush, frozen snowbanks, and uneven slopes slowed progress and limited sightlines, forcing investigators to navigate cautiously while protecting the fragile evidence. Frost-coated branches scraped against clothing and equipment, and the distant creek gurgled quietly beneath a sheet of ice, its sound muted by dense trees. These conditions illustrated how isolation in the Alaska Triangle could obscure clues, allowing the forest and weather to quietly alter or erase evidence before it could be studied. Within the cabin, scattered fragments suggested human presence, yet they refused to yield answers. A melted cooking pot, a partially burned journal, and fragments of fabric hinted at prior occupancy, but offered no identity, timeline, or explanation. Even personal items, like a worn boot or a bent spoon, failed to connect to any known records of missing persons in the region. The items were at once intimate and anonymous, symbols of lives briefly intersecting with the cabin yet ultimately erased by fire. Among the charred remains, subtle anomalies drew attention. A partially melted metal stove lay in an unusual orientation, and the pattern of soot along the ceiling suggested that flames had moved unpredictably, leaping in directions that defied ordinary fire behaviour. Small fragments of paper, almost completely consumed, hinted at notes or a journal, though nothing could be reconstructed. Investigators also noticed faint impressions in the ashen floor where a chair or table may have once rested, providing the only indirect trace of movement within the cabin. These clues hinted at human activity moments before the blaze, yet they offered no narrative or timeline, deepening the sense of mystery. Study of the blaze's origin proved inconclusive. Investigators examined charring patterns, the flow of flames, and heat intensity, but nothing pointed conclusively to an accidental or deliberate cause. There was no evidence of a lightning strike, spark from a stove, or human interference beyond the implied presence suggested by the personal items. Fire behaviour experts noted the unusual spread, where some areas were nearly untouched while others were entirely consumed, creating a puzzle of physics and circumstance that left no solution. Records indicated that the cabin had been used intermittently for decades, primarily by hunters during fall seasons and by trappers who relied on temporary shelter while tending remote lines. Ownership logs and local permits confirmed the structure's legality and sporadic use, but shed no light on the recent event. No missing person reports or local accounts corresponded to anyone expected to be in the area at the time, leaving the blaze detached from any identifiable human narrative. The cabin existed in its own temporal bubble, where human activity could vanish without record, leaving only charred remains as silent testimony. Those who examined the site reported a subtle psychological tension, a quiet unease that came from studying a scene yielding no answers. Investigators described the impression that the cabin itself resisted interpretation, its scorched interior offering only fragments and shadows. Locals echoed this sentiment, noting how the forest seemed to absorb any signs of life and erase human impact almost immediately. The combination of isolation, unexplained destruction, and incomplete human traces left a lingering sense that some questions might never be answered, that the cabin would guard its secrets indefinitely. Within the larger pattern of Alaska Triangle mysteries, the cabin represents a distinct type of enigma, human presence erased without a trace, where fire consumes both evidence and certainty. While vanishings in open wilderness often leave clues of movement, struggle, or environmental impact, this incident demonstrates how even enclosed spaces are not immune to mystery. The combination of isolation, unexplained destruction, and ambiguous remains situates the cabin firmly within the region's long history of unresolved disappearances, where answers are scarce and uncertainty persists. The charred timbers and scattered fragments remain a silent testament to lives once present, leaving only the fire's unanswered questions to linger in the Alaskan forest. The bush pilot's co-pilot found alone. The sky above the Alaskan interior stretched pale and vast, a canvas for a flight that would never follow its expected course, and in its emptiness a single co-pilot would vanish from the record of the known. The aircraft, a small bush plane built to navigate remote routes, departed with routine precision, its crew following standard charts and procedures. Yet somewhere along the journey, one of the most experienced co-pilots in the region slipped from observation, leaving no distress call, no evidence of emergency maneuvers, and a trail that seemed to evaporate into the frozen expanse. By the time search teams were alerted, the co-pilot's absence was already a matter of urgent concern, raising questions that would confound even seasoned aviation authorities. A body was later discovered in a location far removed from the flight plan, found seated against a gentle slope where the forest gave way to a shallow creek. The position was puzzling. The co-pilot's clothing and personal items were largely intact, showing no signs of a struggle or sudden departure, yet the placement suggested movement from the aircraft that defied expectation. Initial photographs captured an almost clinical scene, where the body appeared carefully at rest, as if nature had deliberately arranged it to contradict every plausible scenario of survival or accident. For those documenting the site, the incongruity between the expected route and the final resting place amplified a sense of uncertainty, and even the most methodical investigators could not reconcile what they observed. Search and rescue teams recorded meticulous notes on the condition of the co-pilot and the surrounding area. Gloves, boots, and jacket showed normal wear from flight, but no signs of abrasion or injury consistent with an emergency egress. Small personal items, wristwatch, notebook, and identification remained with the body, yet none offered insight into the circumstances of separation. Teams retraced the probable path, comparing flight data with ground observations, but the pattern of discovery yielded more questions than answers. Every step in the investigative process reinforced a growing awareness that conventional explanations might not suffice in the Alaska Triangle. The aircraft itself was examined in detail. Inspections revealed no evidence of catastrophic mechanical failure, and instruments and fuel levels indicated a largely routine flight. Flight logs recorded standard communication, altitudes, and headings, yet when cross-referenced with the co-pilot's location, inconsistencies became apparent. How the co-pilot could have been separated from a functioning aircraft remained unaccounted for, and no combination of mechanical or procedural errors fully explained the anomaly. Aviation experts debated every variable, from sudden microbursts to misjudged maneuvers, but none produced a theory that aligned with the evidence. Scrutiny revealed procedural anomalies. Standard co-pilot protocols require continuous monitoring of instruments, navigation charts, and radio communication. In this case, transmissions from the plane were uninterrupted until landing, yet the co-pilot was already missing. This discrepancy suggested either an unrecorded in-flight incident or an unexplained absence that occurred without the aircraft itself registering any disturbance. Even experts familiar with remote flights recognize the difficulty of reconciling a missing crew member with an apparently stable flight, amplifying the sense of strangeness surrounding the case. Theories proliferated, but each met with contradictions. Some proposed that the co-pilot had attempted a self-initiated exit, perhaps mistaking a minor problem for an emergency, yet the absence of survival equipment or signs of intentional departure weakened this hypothesis. Others considered sudden medical incapacitation in combination with a misstep, though the position and condition of the body offered no confirmation. Every explanation left gaps, and every gap deepened the mystery, reinforcing a central tension. In the Alaska Triangle, expertise, training, and procedure can still yield no certainty. Psychological and procedural tension accompanied every stage of the investigation. Search and rescue personnel spoke of a persistent unease, an awareness that the scenario violated expectations in ways that textbooks, protocols, and prior experience could not anticipate. Even seasoned aviation authorities described moments of hesitation and reflection, reviewing flight data repeatedly, scrutinizing every item found with the co-pilot, and yet finding no decisive answers. The sense that human understanding had reached its limit infused the investigation with an almost oppressive weight, as if the absence itself had become a tangible presence to reckon with. Historical and comparative context added another layer of intrigue. Bush flights in the Alaskan interior are inherently risky, with unexpected turbulence, sudden visibility changes, and minor equipment failures posing ongoing challenges. Yet even within that known risk, the isolated recovery of a co-pilot without a trace of conventional accident is exceedingly rare. Other recorded incidents typically involve wreckage, footprints, or clear evidence of emergency action. Here, none existed. The co-pilot's disappearance stands apart, underscoring the Alaska Triangle's capacity to turn routine operations into enduring enigmas. The event illustrates how controlled human systems, aircraft, protocols, and trained personnel can still encounter moments beyond comprehension. Every technical check, every procedural safeguard, and every professional assumption was met with outcomes that refused alignment. The combination of factual data, unexplained separation, and procedural compliance creates a scenario that remains resistant to resolution, compelling both investigators and observers to confront uncertainty at a fundamental level. The co-pilot's solitary discovery endures as a stark reminder that even the most precise human endeavours can dissolve into mystery within the Alaska Triangle. The body discovered near the Anchorage Bowl. A quiet stretch of land near Anchorage Bowl became the focus of a grim discovery, one that would challenge investigators to reconcile location, timing, and circumstance without offering clear answers. The body, partially obscured by debris and frost, was found in an area often traversed by hikers and residents, yet it had gone unnoticed until a passerby reported an unusual sight. The discovery immediately raised questions about how someone could have reached that spot and why no one had observed their movements, highlighting a tension between apparent accessibility and unexplained disappearance that would pervade the investigation. The remains were found partially concealed by fallen debris, at a distance from any established trail or road, presenting an immediate puzzle for authorities and onlookers alike. Initial observations suggested that the individual had moved from a different location before arriving at the site, yet no footprints, drag marks, or other signs of passage could be clearly identified. The position of the body implied a sudden halt in movement, but what had caused it remained elusive. Every detail seemed to contradict ordinary expectations, forcing investigators to consider a range of scenarios without favouring any. Law enforcement documented the scene with careful precision, noting details that hinted at movement or struggle yet refused to form a coherent narrative. The body's orientation, combined with partially disturbed soil and scattered leaves, created patterns that could suggest either accidental fall or voluntary movement, but neither explanation satisfied all observable evidence. Photographs and sketches captured the ambiguity, while notes recorded small anomalies, a shifted branch, a faint impression in the mud that might otherwise have been overlooked. These meticulous records would become critical as investigators attempted to reconstruct events that had no obvious logic. Efforts to confirm the identity of the deceased were painstaking, complicated by the condition of the remains and the limited forensic markers available at the scene. Clothing and personal effects provided partial context, yet no official identification was immediately possible. Investigators relied on fingerprints, dental records, and cross-referencing with missing person reports, each step revealing the constraints of conventional procedures when faced with the Alaska Triangle's enigmas. Even after identity was established, the timeline and cause of death remained uncertain, frustrating both authorities and the individual's family. Medical examiners noted unusual aspects during the preliminary autopsy that complicated efforts to determine the cause of death. Despite the body being discovered outdoors and exposed to cold, there were no clear indications of hypothermia, blunt force trauma, or injury consistent with a fall. Tissue samples and clothing analysis suggested that the individual had been active shortly before death, yet no witnesses or records could confirm movements, leaving investigators with a temporal and behavioural gap that intensified the mystery. Scattered personal items, including worn clothing and a damaged backpack, offered fragments of context without explaining the presence or timing of the individual's final moments. A partially empty water bottle suggested preparation for travel, yet it did not clarify how or why the individual had ended up in a location far from intended routes. Investigators examined every object for clues, from stitching on the jacket to markings on the backpack, attempting to draw inferences that could piece together a narrative. Each item provided hints but no definitive answers, deepening the sense of unresolved tension. Forensic specialists emphasized the difficulty of interpreting evidence in cold, partially forested areas, where decomposition, temperature fluctuations, and other environmental factors obscure both timeline and cause. The scene presented challenges that extended beyond ordinary investigative procedures. Evidence could be masked or altered by frost, soil movement, or small wildlife, complicating estimations of how long the body had been present. Experts noted that even minimal alterations could produce misleading impressions, requiring careful documentation, repeated observations, and cross-disciplinary consultation to avoid false conclusions. Officials explored explanations ranging from accidental exposure to disorientation, yet none accounted for why the body appeared so far from expected locations, or why no witnesses had encountered the individual. Some investigators considered the possibility of a sudden medical event or slip, followed by movement that left no clear trail. Others proposed disorientation or temporary confusion that resulted in wandering off familiar paths. Each theory addressed part of the puzzle but failed to account for the combination of intact personal effects, location relative to civilization, and absence of environmental clues, leaving the case unresolved. Residents and local authorities reflected on the incident as part of a pattern of unexplained occurrences within the Anchorage Bowl region, where even semi-populated areas can conceal unresolved tragedies. Stories of missing hikers, sudden disappearances, and delayed recoveries circulated quietly among those familiar with the terrain. While the area was accessible compared to remote backcountry zones, its combination of partial cover, uneven ground, and pockets of isolation created conditions in which human error, accident, or other unknown forces could produce outcomes that defied simple explanation. The recovery reinforced the Alaska Triangle's reputation for leaving questions unanswered, reminding those involved that proximity to civilization does not guarantee understanding or safety. Even in an area where trails, roads, and communities intersect, the patterns of disappearance reflect a broader mystery pervasive throughout the region. Investigators, experts, and locals alike are confronted with the limits of observation, procedure, and expectation, each realization underscoring the strange persistence of unresolved events in the Alaska Triangle. The body's unexplained presence lingers as a silent testament to the enduring mysteries woven into the landscapes of the Alaska Triangle. The railroad worker lost near Portage. Routine maintenance near Portage took an ominous turn when a railroad worker vanished without a trace, leaving supervisors and colleagues struggling to understand how a controlled work environment could yield such uncertainty. The worker had been part of a small team assigned to inspect and maintain tracks along a familiar stretch of the Alaska Railroad, a route routinely patrolled and monitored by employees with years of experience. Yet in spite of the structured environment, the disappearance challenged assumptions about safety and predictability, demonstrating that even areas under constant human oversight can produce circumstances that defy explanation. The worker was highly experienced, accustomed to the terrain and daily protocols, and his tasks were meticulously repeated with precision and care. He knew the curves of the tracks, the placement of minor drainage channels, and the subtle inclines that could complicate footing. His familiarity with the environment made his sudden disappearance all the more alarming, as colleagues and supervisors alike struggled to reconcile the reality of his absence with his known competence and awareness of hazards. He had been observed performing standard inspections, signalling to co-workers at expected intervals, and checking equipment along the rails, yet within hours he was nowhere to be found. The routine rhythm of the workday, measured in footsteps and methodical gestures, was abruptly disrupted by a silence that no one could explain. Every expectation grounded in daily experience seemed irrelevant, as the team realized that a man well-trained and well-prepared had simply vanished from view. A co-worker first noticed the absence, realizing that the worker had failed to return from a short, predefined route. Initial attempts to contact him by radio yielded no response, prompting a search along the immediate track area. Supervisors quickly mobilized additional personnel, and soon the controlled rhythm of the workday shifted into an urgent, disorganized effort to locate someone who had disappeared from a place considered safe and routine. Search parties combed the area, along tracks, embankments, bridges, and adjacent terrain, using flashlights, radios, and methodical sweep patterns. Even minor dips, drainage culverts, and areas of uneven ground were examined with care, yet no trace of the worker emerged. The absence of footprints or any other evidence in expected locations heightened the confusion. Every sweep produced negative results, and the team was left questioning how someone could vanish without leaving even a hint of their path. Scattered personal items, including gloves, a hard hat, and a tool bag, were discovered along the route, seemingly abandoned mid-task. Their placement offered no clear pattern. Some items appeared as if intentionally set aside, while others suggested a sudden pause or interruption. Investigators photographed and documented every detail, hoping to infer movement or sequence, but the arrangement only deepened the sense of mystery. The tools and equipment that once defined a familiar workspace have now become symbols of absence, markers of a life interrupted. A thorough review required detailed interviews, reviewed work logs, and reconstructed timelines in an attempt to align expected movements with the physical evidence. They found inconsistencies and gaps that could not be reconciled, forcing a recognition that traditional investigative methods might not yield the answers. Supervisors and co-workers described him as attentive, experienced, and highly familiar with the area, which made the inexplicable nature of the disappearance even more pronounced. Every meticulous record, every carefully kept log, only highlighted what could not be understood. Speculation ranged from accidental slips into hidden embankments or drainage channels, to sudden medical emergencies or temporary disorientation. Each theory addressed only part of the puzzle, leaving significant questions unresolved. The worker's experience, careful adherence to procedure, and presence in a relatively controlled environment made conventional explanations insufficient. Every logical hypothesis collided with contradictory evidence, reinforcing the idea that this disappearance could not be neatly explained. Colleagues recounted his experience and professionalism, emphasizing that even someone well-trained and attentive could vanish in a place regarded as familiar and relatively safe. Their accounts highlighted a human dimension to the mystery, the realization that routine and experience do not necessarily protect against unforeseen outcomes. Their disbelief and unease reflected both concern for a missing co-worker and a growing awareness that the Alaskan Triangle's strange patterns of disappearance extended beyond isolated wilderness into everyday industrial spaces. The incident became another entry in the catalogue of enigmatic disappearances within the Alaskan Triangle, illustrating that mystery does not respect the boundaries of wilderness, aviation, or remoteness alone. Even highly controlled and familiar environments, where human oversight is expected to provide security, can yield inexplicable events. It reinforced the unsettling truth that predictability offers no guarantee, and that the region continues to hold secrets even in areas considered ordinary or well-managed. The tracks remain silent and unyielding, while the fate of the worker continues to evade understanding, suspended somewhere between routine and mystery. The trapper who never returned from Checkpoint Creek. The disappearance of a veteran trapper along Checkpoint Creek has remained a chilling mystery within the Alaskan Triangle, a stark reminder that even the most seasoned individuals can vanish from familiar ground without explanation. The man was a fixture in the local trapping community, known for his thorough preparation, careful planning, and deep knowledge of the region's topography. He had lived and worked in these remote woods for years, understanding the subtle variations of terrain, the hidden waterways, and the seasonal patterns that could make or break a trapper's success. Yet despite this intimate knowledge, his final journey ended in inexplicable silence. For decades, the trapper navigated the remote terrain with meticulous care, following established routes, setting traps in predictable patterns, and maintaining a routine that left little room for error. His equipment was always in order, and his strategies for survival reflected experience honed over countless winters. Those familiar with his methods often remarked that he moved with the certainty of someone who had memorized every bend, ridge, and creek in his territory. Such mastery, however, proved irrelevant when he vanished without leaving a trace. Neighbours and fellow trappers last saw him departing his cabin at dawn, moving with the confident rhythm of someone who had traversed these paths countless times, leaving no hint of impending peril. His movements were observed by those who expected nothing more than the familiar sight of him following the trail, checking traps and gathering supplies. Yet, as the day unfolded, the usual signals of his presence, footsteps, sound, or the distant sight of a figure moving along the creek, failed to appear, leaving behind an eerie emptiness where familiarity had once been. It was not until evening, when he failed to return and no signals or sightings had been reported, that concern grew, and a search was initiated along his customary lines. Family members and fellow trappers retraced known routes, calling his name and scanning for any sign of movement or distress. The calm, predictable wilderness of Checkpoint Creek, where the trapper had spent countless hours in command of his surroundings, now seemed indifferent, offering no answers to the growing worry that something extraordinary had occurred. Personnel combed the creek, nearby ridges, and the familiar trap zones, coordinating in methodical sweeps that revealed nothing, despite the trapper's known habits and the precise expectations of his route. Searchers moved slowly and deliberately, scanning every shadow and listening for the slightest indication of a break in the natural quiet. Even the most likely hiding places, depressions in the earth and concealed nooks by the water, provided no evidence of the trapper's passage. Hours turned into days, and the meticulous efforts of those who knew the terrain best were met only with silence. Ground and aerial teams searched for the trapper, employing radios, emergency signaling devices, and rudimentary tracking techniques. Though none revealed any indication of his location or direction of travel, searchers tested personal radios for signal strength, checked for any beacon or alert from portable devices, and even tried to trace the trapper's expected movement by patterns established in his prior routes. Investigators noted that despite the availability of technology that could have provided at least partial guidance, no transmissions were received and no signs were detected, underscoring the complete disappearance of someone whose presence had been so carefully accounted for. A few scattered traps and a partially unpacked supply kit were found along the path, their placement suggesting interruption yet offering no definitive clue to the sequence of events or the trapper's fate. Gloves and tools were carefully documented, examined for signs of struggle or mishap, yet none were found. The item's seemingly haphazard placement contradicted the trapper's methodical nature, presenting an enigma. They indicated he had been interrupted, but provided no insight into what caused that interruption or where it had led him. Inspection of the traps and supply items revealed subtle irregularities. Several snares appeared disturbed, but no footprints were leading to or from them, and the partially unpacked kit contained food rations that were untouched, suggesting the trapper had not paused to eat or tend to his equipment. Investigators noted that the arrangement of these objects contradicted his usual precise method, yet they did not indicate a struggle. Even the nearby creek where he'd regularly checked lines and bait bore no discernible trace of recent passage. These anomalies deepened the sense of dislocation between the trapper's practiced habits and the evidence left behind, reinforcing the perplexing notion that something had interrupted him in a manner entirely inconsistent with the patterns of a skilled, experienced woodsman. Officials documented the evidence, interviewed associates, and retraced the trapper's intended movements, encountering anomalies that did not explain, only deepening the mystery. Logs, reports, and oral accounts were analysed to reconstruct a timeline, yet each attempt highlighted contradictions. Times and locations failed to align, and the trapper's extensive experience made accidental missteps seem unlikely. The investigative process only confirmed that the disappearance could not be easily reconciled with what was known of the trapper's habits and abilities. Speculation included misadventure, sudden illness, or encounters with wildlife, Yet the trappers' expertise, strength, and familiarity with the terrain rendered each hypothesis partial and unsatisfying. There were no visible hazards that could have caused a fatal slip, no medical history indicating sudden collapse, and no animal tracks suggesting confrontation. The lack of supporting evidence for any conventional explanation left only the uncomfortable realization that something unaccountable had occurred, defying even the most reasoned assumptions. This case became part of a disturbing pattern of unexplained vanishings in the Alaska Triangle, underscoring that even experienced individuals navigating well-known territory can be claimed by the unknown. From climbers and hunters to pilots and railroad workers, the region has repeatedly demonstrated that expertise and preparation are no safeguard against sudden disappearance. In Checkpoint Creek, the trappers' vanishing reinforced a persistent truth that unpredictability can claim anyone, anywhere, even in the midst of routine and familiarity. Within the silent creek and its winding paths, the trappers' journey remains suspended in uncertainty, leaving only questions that the wilderness refuses to answer. The unidentified woman near Eklutna Woods. The Eklutna Woods have long been a place of quiet isolation, where the forest seems to hold its breath and every sound is muffled by thick moss and fallen needles. Within this expanse, trails are often swallowed by undergrowth and streams can vanish under layers of sediment and snow, creating pockets where human presence can leave only fleeting traces. It was in this remote landscape where few venture without purpose that a mystery emerged, one that underscored the subtle but persistent danger of disappearing entirely within the Alaska Triangle. Officials first encountered skeletal remains during routine survey work, though the discovery itself was almost secondary to the broader challenge of piecing together a life that had faded without witnesses. The preservation of the bones was remarkable, aided by the cold, relatively dry climate that had slowed decomposition, yet the lack of context, the absence of clothing intact enough to identify, or personal effects beyond fragments, immediately presented investigators with an unsolvable puzzle. The scene was meticulously documented to ensure every fragment could potentially contribute to understanding the woman's story. Photographic grids were laid over the area, GPS coordinates recorded for each piece of evidence, and notes captured subtle observations, the spacing of bones, orientation of limbs, and the scattering of small artifacts across leaf litter. Investigators knew that the slightest misstep could compromise forensic integrity, and that even the smallest overlooked detail might hold the key to questions that had lingered unanswered for years. Specialists examined the skeletal remains with painstaking care, searching for markers that could reveal age, sex, stature, and any prior trauma or disease. Teeth were inspected for patterns of wear, bone density and development were measured, and investigators looked for evidence of fractures or healed injuries that might indicate past accidents or chronic conditions. Even these detailed examinations, however, offered only partial insight into her life. Each measurement confirmed that she had existed, moved, and endured, but the final moments of that life remained impenetrable. Remnants of clothing and scattered artifacts hinted at human presence but gave no definitive answers. Shreds of fabric suggested a layered outfit, possibly suited for cold weather, and fasteners indicated functional, durable clothing typical for the region. Yet none of these items could precisely date her presence or provide insight into the circumstances that led her to the woods. Their condition suggested long exposure to the elements and minor disturbance by animals, emphasizing how easily a human story can dissolve into the wilderness. Analysts also examined microtraces in the soil and nearby vegetation, looking for subtle signs of human passage that might suggest how the woman had moved through the area. Using careful stratigraphic sampling and analysis of trampled moss, disturbed leaf litter, and soil compaction, they sought patterns that could reveal whether she had wandered in search of shelter, followed a trail, or been placed there posthumously. While no definitive path emerged, minor disruptions hinted that she'd likely spent time navigating the immediate surroundings, leaving behind an almost imperceptible imprint on the forest floor. These traces, though fragile and easily erased, provided rare insight into her final movements and emphasized how even small interactions with the wilderness can linger for years in subtle ways. Identification proved elusive despite exhaustive attempts. Investigators consulted local and national missing person databases, circulated age and sex estimations, and attempted DNA comparisons with known relatives, no matches were found. This failure highlighted both the limitations of record keeping and the possibility that some individuals vanish without ever being reported missing, leaving no official trail behind. The woman's anonymity became a chilling reminder of the wilderness's capacity to erase lives from collective memory. Reconstructing a timeline of her death presented further obstacles. Analysts considered skeletal weathering, exposure patterns, insect activity, and seasonal temperature fluctuations to approximate the duration since her passing. Cold, snow-laden winters and mild summers each contributed differently to decay, while scavenging animals scattered small fragments over time. Even with these scientific approaches, the result was only a broad estimate, leaving investigators to confront the frustration of knowing the past had faded beyond precise measurement. Hypotheses about her circumstances were explored, but yielded more questions than answers. Accidental misadventure was plausible given the uneven terrain and hidden depressions, yet there was no clear evidence of trauma consistent with a fall. Voluntary disappearance remained a possibility, though the absence of personal correspondence, known travel intentions, or social connections complicated this theory. Even foul play could not be confirmed or dismissed, as the scene showed no signs of struggle, defensive wounds, or nearby human interference. Each potential explanation collided with gaps in evidence, leaving only speculation. The anthropological team also considered dietary and environmental clues encoded in her skeletal remains, seeking any hint of her background or lifestyle before her disappearance. Analysis of bone isotopes can indicate regional diet, water sources, and even migration patterns. In this case, preliminary isotope results suggested she had spent her life in the broader Alaskan interior, consuming a diet consistent with local fish and game rather than imported or urban foods. This finding implied she may have been familiar with wilderness survival, which deepened the mystery. Someone seemingly competent in navigating Alaska's forests had nonetheless vanished without a trace. Such subtle biochemical fingerprints offered tantalizing hints about her origins, while reinforcing the enduring enigma of her fate. The community and those familiar with the area responded with a mixture of empathy, unease, and reflection. Longtime residents, hikers, and search volunteers noted how easily someone could vanish unnoticed and remain undiscovered for years. Stories circulated of other disappearances in the region, individuals who had entered the wilderness alone, or for work or recreation, and were never accounted for. These parallels reinforced the unsettling reality that Eklutna Woods, like much of the Alaska Triangle, holds both human life and absence in equal measure. Within the larger pattern of the Alaska Triangle, the case of the unidentified woman is emblematic of the region's ability to swallow human presence completely. Countless individuals, whether explorers, hunters, or casual travelers, have vanished in areas where search and rescue operations are hindered by terrain, weather, or sheer scale. The woman's remains serve as a silent witness to the wilderness's indifference, a life concluded without explanation, leaving investigators, neighbors, and historians to piece together what little can be known. Hidden in the shadows of Eklutna Woods, the woman's story lingers, unfinished and resistant to explanation. The hiker found without his gear in the interior. Deep within Alaska's interior, where forests stretch unbroken and rivers carve paths through remote valleys, a lone hiker embarked on a journey that would become an enduring mystery. His route was familiar to experienced hikers, yet the area's vast isolation amplified the risks inherent in any excursion. By the end of the day, he was expected to return, but when that did not happen, a series of questions arose that would remain largely unanswered. The hiker's disappearance was made even more confounding by the fact that, when his body was later found, he had no essential equipment, leaving investigators puzzled over how and why he had been separated from the gear that would have ensured his survival. On the morning of his departure, he moved with deliberate focus, selecting clothing suitable for the interior's changing conditions and checking a minimal pack that, to onlookers, appeared adequate for a day's trek. Yet small anomalies were later noted: a missing water bottle, slightly worn footwear, and the absence of a familiar hiking pole. These details, though minor at the time, gained significance in retrospect, hinting that the hiker might have altered his usual preparation or made unexpected decisions that would later factor into the unfolding mystery. Friends and family would later recall a sense of quiet determination, but no warning of trouble, leaving only the bare facts of his final movements. By mid-afternoon, concern had begun to mount. The hiker had not returned by the anticipated hour, and attempts to reach him by phone failed. Local authorities were contacted, and search alerts were circulated among nearby ranger stations and volunteer groups familiar with the interior's rugged terrain. Observers noted that this was a region where even minor missteps could have serious consequences, and the hiker's failure to communicate raised immediate alarms. Unlike other hikers who occasionally get delayed, there was no indication that he had planned an extended outing, which made the eventual discovery of his body even more perplexing. Search operations mobilized quickly, combining aerial reconnaissance with ground teams that scoured the valleys, ridgelines, and river corridors where he might have traveled. Harsh weather and dense underbrush hampered every attempt, and the sheer scale of the interior turned even the most basic search into a logistical challenge. Dogs were brought in to track scent, but the results were inconsistent, suggesting that environmental factors or movement through waterlogged areas may have eroded any reliable trail. Each effort brought hope, yet also frustration, as the vast wilderness seemed indifferent to human concern. When the hiker's body was finally located, it was far from any established path, in a shallow depression at the edge of a ridge overlooking a minor tributary. He lay in a position that suggested exhaustion or collapse, yet no serious trauma was evident. Most striking was the absence of his backpack, protective clothing, and personal items, gear that would have been essential for navigating the interior's unpredictable conditions. Investigators were left to reconcile how a seemingly prepared hiker had ended up exposed, far from his intended route, without any of the equipment that could have supported him through the day. Cold exposure left visible traces on the body, with early frostbite on extremities and minor abrasions consistent with falls over uneven ground. There were no signs of violent struggle or predation, and toxicology and medical reviews indicated he had been physically healthy before departure. Despite these insights, the hiker's last movements remained opaque. Each observed detail created a tension between what should have been predictable and the inexplicable reality that confronted searchers and investigators alike. The missing gear prompted intense scrutiny. Analysts considered scenarios in which he may have shed equipment to move faster, lost items while crossing water or terrain obstacles, or been separated from them through external interference. Even mundane explanations raised more questions. Why would a hiker voluntarily abandon water, warmth, or navigation aids, especially in a region known for sudden weather changes and treacherous footing? The absence of these items suggested a sequence of decisions or events far from ordinary, deepening the enigma surrounding his final hours. Every step between departure and discovery was pieced together as investigators attempted to reconstruct his path. Topographic analysis, trail conditions, and estimated walking speeds indicated he had deviated from his planned route, possibly navigating through minor ravines and unmarked terrain. Some deviations could have been caused by confusion or misjudgment, but the lack of equipment makes it difficult to determine whether he was acting intentionally, responding to environmental pressures, or disoriented in a way that left no trace. Each hypothesis seemed plausible, yet ultimately insufficient to fully explain the circumstances. Environmental and human factors were weighed carefully. Minor snow shifts, exposure to wind and precipitation, and the presence of wildlife could have influenced his movements or concealed traces of his passage. Yet none of these could account for the deliberate separation from his essential gear. Even with extensive search records and observations, the intersection of human behavior and natural forces produced more uncertainty than clarity, leaving open the question of how a competent hiker might succumb so completely to the interior's challenges. Community members, rangers and hikers familiar with the region reflected on the case in the context of other disappearances within the Alaska Triangle. Patterns of individuals vanishing under seemingly routine circumstances, sometimes leaving behind possessions or altering familiar behaviors, lend the region a reputation for mystery. While each incident is unique, the hiker's fate fits into a broader tapestry of unexplained events, where survival instincts, human decision-making, and environmental hazards intersect in ways that defy simple explanation. Looming over the silent interior, the hiker's final steps remain a silent riddle traced only by the questions he left behind.